Hey friends! Glad you're here at Potter Vibes. We've cooked up something special. What if Fleur Delacour and Daphne Greengrass dueled for Harry at the Yule Ball and ancient magic forced them to share him? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The night before the fire. The Great Hall had never looked like this before, and Harry suspected it never would again. Every ice sculpture caught the candlelight differently. Some threw blue fractals across the stone walls, others split the glow into something almost golden, and the whole effect was less like a school dance and more like standing inside a jewel. The enchanted ceiling had dropped its usual star map in favor of a deep violet sky threaded with silver clouds that actually moved, drifting slow and purposeful above 400 students who were, for one night, pretending they were somewhere other than a Scottish castle in December. Harry stood near the champions' table and felt profoundly out of place. His robes were the best he'd ever worn. Hermione had practically wrestled him into them, dark green with silver trim, and he had to admit they didn't look terrible, but wearing good clothes at a party did not automatically make you a person who knew what to do at a party. He'd escorted Parvati in, done the obligatory opening dance without stepping on anyone's feet more than twice, and then they'd more or less parted ways by mutual silent agreement. Parvati was currently on the dance floor with a Beauxbatons boy who actually wanted to be there. Harry didn't blame her. He picked up a glass of something cold and fizzing from the table and watched the room. Cedric Diggory looked genuinely happy, which Harry found he could appreciate without bitterness tonight. Victor Crumb danced with Hermione with the careful attention of someone who took everything seriously, including dancing, and Hermione was flushed and bright-eyed in a way Harry had never seen before. Ron was sitting 3 tables over with an expression like a storm front rolling in off the North Sea. Normal enough. What was not normal was the feeling that had been sitting at the base of Harry's sternum since he'd walked into the Great Hall, a low, resonant hum, like a tuning fork struck somewhere deep in the castle's foundation. He'd noticed it the moment he crossed the threshold, dismissed it as nerves, noticed it again an hour later when the sensation hadn't faded, and was now on his 3rd glass of fizzing pumpkin juice trying to decide whether he was imagining things. He was not, as it happened, imagining things. But he wouldn't know that for another 40 minutes. The doors from the entrance hall opened again, and Fleur Delacour walked in. She was late, which Harry suspected was deliberate. The Beauxbatons champion moved through the room the way water moves through a space, finding every gap, displacing everything around her without apparent effort, and leaving a wake of turned heads and interrupted conversations. She wore deep silver that managed to look both formal and like something she'd throw on without thinking, her blonde hair loose in a way that shouldn't have worked with formal dress and absolutely did. Her partner, some Beauxbatons 7th year who looked both ecstatic and terrified, was doing his best to keep up. Harry watched her for exactly as long as it took to register that every other male in his line of sight had also stopped what they were doing to watch her, and then he looked away on principle. The hum in his chest intensified. He told himself it was the Vila thing. It was well documented, impersonal, like being near a fire, you felt the heat whether or not you decided to. He poured himself a 4th glass of pumpkin juice. "You're going to make yourself sick," said a voice to his left. Harry turned. Daphne Greengrass was standing 2 feet away, which was remarkable because he hadn't heard her approach at all. She was in his potions class, sat 3 rows back, had never once spoken to him in 3.5 years, and was currently looking at his glass of pumpkin juice with the kind of mild disapproval that suggested she'd been watching him drink for longer than he'd realized. She was wearing robes the color of deep winter water, that particular shade of blue-green that exists right before water goes fully dark, and her dark hair was up in something architectural that Harry couldn't have described but thought looked genuinely good. She was tall for a 4th year, with the sort of posture that came from being told to stand up straight before you were old enough to argue about it. Her expression was composed in a way that felt practiced rather than natural, like a language she'd learned young and now spoke without thinking. "It's just pumpkin juice," Harry said. 4th glass. "You're stress-drinking festive beverages at the Yule Ball." She looked at him with grey-blue eyes that were doing a careful, methodical assessment. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." "I'm fine." "I didn't say you weren't fine. I said you'd rather be anywhere else." She tilted her head slightly. There's a difference. Harry wasn't sure what to make of her. Daphne Greengrass was Slytherin, which at Hogwarts came with a whole associated architecture of assumption, and he was aware enough of his own biases to know that he was currently fighting them. But there was something in the way she was looking at him, not warmly, not coldly, just with a kind of direct, uncomplicated attention, that he found he didn't dislike. "Why are you talking to me?" he asked, because he was Harry Potter and subtlety had never been his strongest skill. Something shifted in her expression, not offense, more like a calculation completing itself. "Honest question deserves an honest answer," she said. "I came tonight intending to speak with you. I've been working out the best moment for approximately an hour." "An hour? You were preoccupied with your date. Then she left for the dance floor and you started cataloging the ice sculptures, which told me you were bored and not looking for conversation, so I waited." She glanced at the nearest ice sculpture, a dragon, its frozen wings spread wide, as though acknowledging his aesthetic interest. "Then you started the pumpkin juice inventory, and I decided another 10 minutes would push you into genuine antisocial territory." Harry stared at her. "That is the most calculated approach to saying hello I've ever encountered." "Greengrass family principle," she said, without particular pride or apology. "If you're going to do something, do it correctly. What did you want to speak to me about?" She held his gaze for a moment. There was something behind the composed expression, not quite nerves, but something adjacent to it, something she was managing carefully. "I wanted to propose a partnership," she said. "Tournament adjacent. You're a champion, which means you have resources and access that other students don't. I have knowledge and connections that you demonstrably lack. You want to make a deal. I want to make an arrangement that benefits both of us." Harry looked at her steadily. The hum in his chest had grown more pronounced, and he noticed with a distant sort of interest that it seemed to be coming from the direction of Daphne Greengrass as much as from anywhere else. "Why?" he asked. "What do you actually get out of it?" That calculation again behind her eyes. "Information," she said, after a beat. "Specifically, information about you that isn't filtered through the Prophet or Dumbledore's public narrative." It was the most honest thing she could have said, which was probably why it caught him off guard. He'd expected something Slytherin, some careful exchange wrapped in plausible deniability. This was just the truth, stated plainly, which was either very confident or very unusual or both. "Fair enough," he said, before he'd fully decided to say it. Daphne blinked. Just once, quickly, the first uncontrolled thing she'd done since she walked over. "Fair enough," she repeated. "I said what I said." He offered his hand. "Harry Potter. I assume you knew that." Something softened at the edge of her expression, not quite a smile but the structural precursor to one. "Daphne Greengrass," she said, and shook his hand. The moment her hand touched his, the hum became a chord. Neither of them moved. Harry felt it run up his arm and settle in his sternum, not painful, not even particularly alarming, just unmistakably there, like a note held too long. Daphne's composed expression flickered into something unguarded and sharp. She pulled her hand back first, looking at her own palm as though it had done something without permission. "What was that?" she said, and it was the first time she'd sounded like she didn't have an answer ready. "I have no idea," Harry said, which was the truth. "I've been feeling something like it all night. Weaker, but similar." Daphne looked at him with an entirely new quality of attention. "Since when?" "Since I walked through the main doors." She turned and looked at the great hall, doing a rapid, comprehensive sweep of the room that Harry recognized as someone cataloging data. Her eyes stopped on something, and Harry followed her line of sight to find Fleur Delacour, who had navigated to the edge of the dance floor and was standing alone for a moment. Her Beauxbatons partner had been intercepted by a group of his friends, with an expression Harry had never seen on her face before. Fleur Delacour looked frustrated. Not annoyed. Not bored. Genuinely, sharply frustrated, in the way of someone who is feeling something they don't understand and finds that intolerable. Her eyes moved across the room and found Harry's with an immediacy that said she'd been looking for him, even if she hadn't known she was. She crossed the room in about 11 seconds, which given the crowd was either impressive or alarming, and came to a stop in front of Harry and Daphne with the energy of someone who had decided that social niceties were taking too long. "You," she said to Harry, in her French-accented English, pointing at him with the directness of someone used to simply indicating what they wanted. "You feel it too." "The hum?" Harry said. Fleur stared at him. "You are calling it a hum?" "I didn't have a better word. It is not a hum." She pressed her hand flat against her sternum in a gesture so unguarded that Harry suspected she didn't realize she was doing it. It is resonant, it is." She stopped herself, seemed to remember that Daphne was standing there, and looked at her for the first time with the kind of evaluating look that stripped things down to essentials. Daphne gave it right back. "Greengrass," Daphne said, coolly. "Delacour," Fleur returned, with a precise and equal amount of cool. "You both feel it," Harry said, because someone needed to be practical. "Since when?" "Since I entered the room," Fleur said. I thought it was the castle's magic. Old places have old feelings. But it became stronger." Her eyes fixed on Harry again. "It became stronger the closer I moved toward you." "Same result from this direction," Daphne said, with the tone of someone reporting data points. Harry looked at both of them. Fleur was watching him with sharp, searching eyes, the practiced Vila composure partially set aside in favor of something more immediate. Daphne was in full calculation mode, reading the room, reading him, reading Fleur, with the focused attention of someone building a model in real time. He was standing between them and he could feel the resonance in his chest pulling in two directions at once, like two notes building toward a chord that hadn't resolved yet. "Something is happening," he said. "And I don't think any of us know what it is." "We should move out of the hall," Daphne said. "Somewhere without 400 witnesses." "Agreed," Fleur said, which seemed to surprise Daphne slightly. They made their way out through a side corridor. Harry knew Hogwarts better than most, and he led them down a passage off the main hallway that ended in a small alcove with stone benches and a window that looked out over the frozen lake. The castle's ambient warmth made it comfortable despite the December cold outside, and the distant sounds of the orchestra filtered through the walls, something slow and waltz-like, all strings and breath. The moment Harry stepped clear of the great hall's threshold, the resonance changed. It didn't fade. It clarified. Like a signal resolving from static into something clear and specific, it settled into a triangular configuration, here, and here, and here, and Harry understood without words that the 3 points were himself, Fleur, and Daphne, and that the lines connecting them were not metaphorical. "Oh," he said quietly. Fleur had gone very still. She breathed. Daphne's jaw had tightened in the way of someone refusing to be startled. "It changed when we crossed the threshold," she said. "It clarified," Harry corrected. She looked at him with sharp attention. "Yes. Clarified. That's more precise." She sat down on one of the stone benches with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing not to be moved by events, and folded her hands in her lap, and looked at both of them. "We need to assess what we know. Empirically. We need to assess what is happening," Fleur said, still standing, with a coiled energy that suggested sitting down was not currently an available option for her. "This is old magic. I have felt echoes of old magic before. My grandmother's house in the Dordogne has stones in the foundation that sing when it rains. This is like that but, louder," Harry said. "More intentional," Fleur corrected, looking at him with something that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it, like she'd expected less precision from him. "It has direction. Purpose. Right." Harry looked at his own hands, then at the space between them, then at the two very different girls watching him from two very different angles. "Okay. So something in the castle, or something connected to the castle, has noticed all three of us, and linked us in some way, and it started tonight at the Yule Ball. Is this a Triwizard thing?" Fleur asked. I don't think so. The tournament magic feels different. More mechanical. Contractual. He paused, surprised at himself for being able to articulate that. It wasn't like he'd studied magical theory extensively. But he'd been feeling the tournament's magic on him for months, the weight of the contract, the sense of obligation, and this felt nothing like that. This feels older. Much older. How much older? Daphne asked. Like the castle itself is older than the tournament. Fleur made a sound that wasn't a word and sat down on the bench across from Daphne, which put Harry standing between them like a vertex. She smoothed her silver robes, pressed her lips together, and looked for the first time like she was uncertain what came next. It was such an un-Fleur-like moment that Harry found himself looking at her more carefully, not as the Vila champion who walked through rooms like she owned them, but as someone who had just found a door she hadn't known was there and wasn't sure whether to open it. "We should keep this between us for now," Daphne said. Both Harry and Fleur looked at her. "If this is significant magic," she continued, with the even reasonableness of someone who has already worked 3 steps ahead, "then telling adults, particularly Dumbledore, will result in it being categorized and managed and explained back to us in ways that serve institutional purposes. We lose control of whatever this is the moment we bring it into official channels." "You don't trust Dumbledore," Harry said. "I don't trust anyone's interpretation of events that directly affect me," Daphne said, with a precision that made it sound less like paranoia and more like weather observation. "Neither should you, really." Harry thought about Dumbledore placing his name in the goblet of fire and doing nothing when everyone else had turned on him. He thought about the way Dumbledore had explained things to him over the years, always enough truth to navigate, never enough to understand. He thought about the feeling of being managed, which he recognized with a clarity that surprised him. "She has a point," he said to Fleur. Fleur was watching Daphne with an expression that was recalibrating in real time, the initial dismissal replaced by something more careful. "You are Slytherin," she said, as though establishing a data point. "You're half Vila," Daphne replied, without heat. "We're both working with something we didn't choose." A beat of silence. Then Fleur said, surprisingly, "Fair," and it came out with a kind of dry irony that suggested she had more humor than she usually let on. The resonance between all 3 of them shifted again. Not growing stronger, deepening, somehow. Like a root system reaching further into the ground, establishing hold. Harry sat down on the bench next to the window, equidistant from both of them, and looked out at the frozen lake. The reflected light of the castle made the ice look almost luminous. Somewhere beneath it, the Mere People were almost certainly doing whatever Mere People did in December, entirely unconcerned with magical bonds formed at school dances above them. "What do we do tonight?" he asked. "Tonight, nothing," Daphne said. "We go back in. We finish the ball. We observe whether the connection fades or holds overnight, and tomorrow we discuss what we actually know." "Very methodical," Fleur observed. "Yes," Daphne agreed, unapologetically. "I like it," Harry said. Daphne looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. There was something in it that might have been gratitude if she'd been a different kind of person, or something that wasn't gratitude but was in the same neighborhood. Fleur stood up, smoothing her silver robes back into perfection, and the composed Vila mask reassembled itself around her, but not entirely. The cracks were showing now, and Harry suspected they'd been showing for longer than she'd realized, because the magic between them was doing something to performance that made it difficult to maintain. He could feel her, not her thoughts, not clearly, but her presence, the way you can feel a candle without seeing it, and that presence was sharper and more complicated and more genuinely interesting than the surface version she walked around in. "Agreed," she said. "Tomorrow. We meet somewhere private." "Library, East Wing, the alcove near the restricted section," Daphne said, as though she'd already picked it out. 7 in the morning, before anyone is there. "Cheerful timing," Harry said. "Would you prefer to discuss ancient magical bonds in the middle of lunch?" 7 in the morning is fine, he said. They went back into the great hall separately, staggering their re-entry by 5 minutes each. Harry went first, retrieved a glass of pumpkin juice, fifth one, he noted, establishing a personal record, and found a corner from which to observe the rest of the evening with rather more to think about than he'd started with. He could feel them both. Not intrusively, not overwhelmingly, just the way you're aware of two sounds in a room, neither demanding attention, both present. Fleur had re-entered with perfect timing, gliding back to her partner with the seamless confidence of someone who had stepped out for 30 seconds rather than the better part of 20 minutes, and was now on the dance floor looking like exactly what she appeared to be on the surface. Harry could feel the control that was costing her and found that interesting. Daphne came back in 5 minutes after Fleur. She sat down at a table, picked up a drink, and entered into what looked from a distance like a perfectly pleasant conversation with Tracy Davis. Only Harry, feeling the triangulated resonance, understood how much of her attention was actually cataloguing the room rather than the conversation. He watched the ice sculptures catch the candlelight and thought about old magic and purpose and the particular feeling of 3 notes finally becoming a chord. Then the orchestra swung into something fast and complicated, and Parvati materialized at his elbow with an expression that said she was going to ask him to dance and he was going to say yes, and he did, because it was Christmas and the night wasn't over and he was 4 for 4 on decisions tonight that he hadn't fully thought through and it seemed a shame to break the streak. He danced. He thought. The hum held steady in his chest all the way through the last waltz and the dying of the candles and the dispersal of 400 students into staircases and dormitories and the cold December hallways of Hogwarts. When he finally lay down in his 4-poster in Gryffindor Tower, the resonance was still there, softer, deeper, the way a fire sounds when it's been banked for the night. Still burning. Just settled in. He stared at the canopy above his bed and thought, something chose us tonight. Not randomly, not carelessly. Something very old that lived in the stones of this castle had looked at 3 fourth-year students at a school dance and made a decision. He fell asleep wondering what it had seen. Across the castle, Daphne Greengrass sat at her dormitory desk long after Tracy and Pansy and Millicent had gone to sleep, with a blank piece of parchment in front of her and a quill that she hadn't put to the paper yet. She was thinking about the moment she'd shaken Harry Potter's hand and felt the world reorganize itself around a new fact. She was thinking about how she'd come to the Yule Ball with a plan, clean, practical, beneficial, perfectly constructed, and how the plan had survived first contact with reality in the technical sense that she'd executed it, but in spirit was now unrecognizable. She'd expected Harry Potter to be the boy who lived in the way that everyone expected the boy who lived to be, reactive, slightly lost, earnest and blunt and perpetually responding to things rather than initiating them. What she had not expected was someone who listened to her describe watching him for an hour with a practical eye rather than getting offended, who immediately grasped the distinction between fading and clarifying, who looked at a French half-villa and a Slytherin ice queen and said she has a point without the slightest hesitation. She wrote a single line on the parchment, Ardentis vinculum. Then she drew a question mark after it and stared at the words. The term had surfaced from the section of her memory where she stored things from her father's private library, old magic, foundational stuff, the kind of theory that predated everything she'd been taught formally. She wasn't certain. She needed sources. She rolled the parchment, tucked it into her notes, and went to bed. 2 floors up and across the castle, Fleur Delacour was standing at the window of the Beauxbatons girls' temporary dormitory, looking at the frozen lake. She had changed out of her silver robes and braided her hair back and was leaning against the cold stone of the window frame with her arms crossed and her jaw set in a way that nobody ever saw because she never let anyone see her like this, stripped of performance, thinking hard, genuinely unsettled. She had come to Hogwarts knowing she was the best candidate from Beauxbatons. She knew her own strengths clearly, without vanity, her magical aptitude was exceptional, her Vila heritage gave her tools no fully human which possessed, and she had worked 3 times as hard as any of her competitors because she had known she would have to. The boys who stared at her in corridors, the girls who hated her on principle, the professors who underestimated her because of what she was, she had learned to use all of it, to turn every disadvantage into leverage. She had not accounted for old magic with its own agenda. She pressed her palm to the cold glass and felt, distantly, the 2 points of the triangle, one in Gryffindor Tower, one in the dungeons, connected to her by something she could not dismiss and could not fully examine and could not, she was beginning to realize, control. This was the problem with something genuinely new. You couldn't outmaneuver it until you understood it, and understanding it required being honest about what you were feeling, and Fleur Delacour had not built her entire competitive posture on the foundation of honesty about feelings. She pushed off the window and went to bed, which was practical. She did not sleep for 2 hours, which was less practical but more honest. Outside, the frozen lake reflected the stars. The castle settled around its own deep foundations, old stone breathing slow and patient, the magic in its bones doing what it had done for 1,000 years, recognizing, recording, and remembering. The ball was over. 3 people lay awake in the dark, thinking about each other, connected by something none of them had chosen, and all 3 of them would have to choose again, deliberately, clearly, with full knowledge, before the night's work could be called complete. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the magic held its 3 chosen points in the dark, and waited. There were 2 people in Hogwarts who did not sleep at all. The first was Bartemius Crouch Jr., wearing Alastair Moody's face, sitting in the Defense Against the Dark Arts office with his magical eye rotating slowly in its socket and fixed on the wall facing the Great Hall, a wall he'd reinforced with detection charms last week, monitoring for disruptions in the castle's ambient magical field. The detection charts had gone chaotic at approximately 9:43 p.m., during the Yule Ball's second hour. He'd pulled the readings and read them 3 times. Then he'd sat very still for a long time, with his one real eye narrowed and his borrowed face expressionless, running calculations. The Ardentis Vinculum. He knew what it was. He'd encountered references in the Dark Lord's private library during the years of his service, and more recently in the extensive reading he'd done preparing for this year. It was pre-foundational magic, older than Hogwarts, older than the Ministry, old enough to predate the distinction between light and dark that everyone seemed to think was a fixed feature of the universe. And it had activated tonight. He leaned back in Moody's chair, which creaked at the same point it always creaked, and considered what the Dark Lord would want to know about this, and in what order. The vinculum would complicate Harry Potter. Not weaken him, that was the thing people always assumed about bonds, that they were chains. But the Dark Lord had studied it more thoroughly, and the picture was more alarming. Bonds didn't weaken the bonded. He would need to report this carefully. The second person not sleeping was Albus Dumbledore, who was sitting at his desk with his hands folded and his eyes on the middle distance, listening to the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black snoring behind him and thinking about the readings from the castle's ambient magic monitors, readings that he reviewed every morning, but that had pinged his awareness tonight through the small crystal ball he kept active on his desk. Dumbledore had sat with the readings for 90 minutes. He had cross-referenced them against his memory, which was exceptional, and against his private notes, which were extensive, and had arrived at a conclusion he found simultaneously remarkable and deeply inconvenient. The Ardentis Vinculum. Of course. The castle had been building toward it for months, and he had noticed the pressure in the ambient field but misread its direction. He had thought it was the tournament, and in fairness the tournament had accelerated it, but the vinculum had chosen its own moment. Harry. Dumbledore looked at the tiny flame of the candle on his desk and thought about paths. He had been thinking about Harry's path for 13 years, had traced its necessary arc from tragedy to sacrifice with the kind of grief that doesn't diminish but that you learn to work around, like a river learns to work around a stone. Harry had to walk a particular road. Dumbledore had always believed that, had built everything around that belief, had made choices he could not unmake in service of that necessity. The vinculum complicated the road. Not blocked it. But changed the surface. He was quiet for a very long time, and the candle burned down by a significant measure, and eventually Fawkes stirred on his perch and made a soft sound, not a song, just a syllable, something between inquiry and comfort. "I know," Dumbledore said softly, to the bird or himself or the empty room. "I know." He picked up a quill and began to write, slowly and carefully, with the precision of someone who knew that what they wrote now would matter later, and was choosing every word like it might be the last one they'd get right. The castle breathed around him, old and knowing. Outside, The first hour of December 26th moved through Hogwarts in silence, and in 3 separate rooms, a bond that had been waiting a very long time for 3 specific people to find themselves in the same room at the same moment held its new configuration with the patient certainty of something that had always known this was coming. It didn't sing. It didn't need to. It simply held. Chapter 2, Thread and Thorn. Harry woke at 5:30 in the morning with the absolute certainty that someone was angry. Not him. He was fine, groggy, slightly cold where his blanket had shifted, with the particular mental texture of someone who'd slept light and dreamed in fragments. The anger wasn't his. It was coming from somewhere else, arriving through the resonance like a broadcast on a frequency he hadn't known he could receive, and it was sharp and focused and had the quality of someone who had woken up, remembered something, and immediately decided to be furious about it. He lay still for a moment, staring at the canopy. Fleur, he thought, without knowing how he knew. The anger had a particular flavor, not hot, not explosive, but compressed, like pressure building behind a sealed door. It was the anger of someone who prided themselves on control, discovering that something had bypassed their control entirely while they slept, and who found that intolerable. Yeah. That was Fleur. He could also feel, more distantly, a third presence, quieter, more opaque, like a room where someone had drawn all the curtains. Daphne was awake too, and she was thinking hard about something, and she had apparently decided that thinking hard meant keeping everything internal, because whatever was coming through from her direction was more texture than content. A sense of concentrated, methodical attention pointed inward. Harry sat up. Ron was still asleep. Neville was still asleep. The dormitory had the particular pre-dawn stillness of a place where everyone has agreed, without discussion, to remain unconscious for at least 2 more hours. Harry got up, got dressed, and left. The corridors were empty this early, which he appreciated. He moved through the castle with the ease of someone who'd been navigating it at odd hours for 3 years, through passages that the map had shown him and the map had shown him how to feel without needing to look at it. Hogwarts was different at this hour, less performed, more honest, the way a person is different when they think nobody's watching. The torches were lower, the shadows longer, and the ambient magic of the castle was more perceptible without 400 students' worth of magical signature cluttering the air. He could feel the bond more clearly too. It was settled differently than it had been last night. Less like a new chord struck and more like something that had been rearranging furniture while he slept, moving through the architecture of him and leaving things in new positions, not painfully, not disruptively, but undeniably. He noticed, flexing his hands, that his magical awareness felt different. Broader. Like a window that had been slightly ajar had been pushed fully open, and now the air coming through it brought information it hadn't before. He stopped at the end of the corridor that led to the library's east wing and waited. Daphne arrived at 6:59 by the clock on the far wall, from a direction that suggested she'd come via a route Harry didn't know, which was interesting. She was in her school robes already, pressed, perfect, not a hair out of place, with a bag over one shoulder and an expression of someone who had slept adequately and was ready to work. She stopped when she saw him, assessed the fact that he was already there, and nodded once in a way that might have been approval. "You feel different," she said, by way of greeting. "Good morning to you too. I mean the bond. It's different from last night." She set her bag down on the bench by the alcove entrance and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. "More settled. More present. It rearranged things while I slept," Harry said. Daphne paused with the parchment half unfolded and looked at him. "Rearranged. That's the best word I have. Like it made itself at home." He leaned against the alcove wall. "You were awake early. Thinking hard." Her expression went briefly very still. "You could feel that. Not what you were thinking. Just, that you were thinking. Intensely. It felt like a closed room." He paused. "I could feel Fleur was angry." "Could you?" Daphne finished unfolding the parchment and smoothed it against her knee with the careful attention of someone buying time to process information they hadn't expected. "That's a significant development." Yeah. She looked at the parchment. At the top, in her neat, precise script, were 2 words, Ardentis Vinculum. Below it she had written 4 lines of condensed notes in a hand that was difficult to read quickly, which Harry suspected was deliberate rather than accidental. "Do you know what that is?" he asked. "I have a partial reference. My father's library has a section on pre-foundational magical theory. I read widely as a child because it was expected." She said this flatly, without pride or resentment, just a fact. "The Ardentis Vinculum appears in 3 texts that I can recall. All 3 describe it as a bonding magic older than the Hogwarts founding, possibly as old as the Merlin period of British magical history. It doesn't operate like modern bonding spells, it's not cast, it's not contracted, it can't be initiated by any individual practitioner. It activates," Harry said. "It activates. In response to specific conditions." She tapped the parchment. "That's where my information runs out. The texts I remember were incomplete, academic references rather than primary sources. I know what it is. I don't know what triggers it or what it does once established. We need primary sources. Which is why I suggested the library." She glanced toward the restricted section. "Though I suspect the relevant texts won't be in the accessible stacks." "That's never stopped me before," Harry said, and the way he said it, matter of fact, almost bored, made Daphne look at him with the expression she'd had last night when he'd grasped clarified instead of faded. "Recalibrating. You break into the restricted section regularly." "Not regularly. As needed." He paused. "I have an invisibility cloak." Daphne absorbed this. "Of course you do," she said, in a tone that was not quite dry enough to be sarcasm but was in the neighborhood. "Is there anything else you possess that would be relevant to this situation and that I should know about?" "Probably. I'll mention things as they become relevant." She almost smiled. The structural precursor to one, the slight shift around her eyes. Efficient. The library doors opened, and Fleur walked in. She was moving faster than her usual glide, not running, nothing as undone as that, but with the kinetic energy of someone who had been walking quickly for several corridors and was not going to admit it. She was in Beauxbatons robes, silver blue, with her hair in a quick braid rather than whatever architectural event it had been last night. Her expression was composed, but the resonance told Harry that the composure was being maintained with active effort, the way you hold a door closed against wind. She saw them, altered her course without breaking stride, and arrived in the alcove in the particular way of someone who has decided to be precisely as in control as they appear and not 1 degree less. "Good," she said. "You are both here. Were you worried we wouldn't be?" Daphne asked. "I was not worried about anything." Fleur sat down on the bench across from Daphne with the deliberateness of someone settling into a chair they've decided to own. "I was annoyed." "I know," Harry said. "I felt it at 5:30 this morning." Fleur turned to look at him with an expression that was, for just a moment, completely unguarded, startled and sharp, and something underneath that he couldn't name yet, something with an edge to it. Then the composure rebuilt itself and she looked at him steadily. "You felt my emotional state," she said. "Just the shape of it. Not the specifics. The shape." She repeated it carefully, like testing whether the word fit. "And what was the shape?" "Compressed anger. The kind that comes from losing control of something." A beat of silence. Fleur held his gaze with an expression that was doing 3 things at once, assessing him, deciding how to respond, and managing what was clearly a complicated reaction to being read accurately by someone she'd met 12 hours ago. "Yes," she said finally, and the word cost her something small but real. "I woke up and the bond, as you call it, was present in a way it had not been last night. More settled. More mine, somehow, and that is the part one find." She stopped. "Alarming?" Daphne offered. "Presumptuous," Fleur said, with precision. "Things that are mine because I chose them. Not because something decided for me while I slept." Agreed, Daphne said, with a feeling in her voice that suggested she found this particular point personally significant. Agreed, Harry said, because it was true. The three of them looked at each other in the early morning light of the library alcove, and something shifted into a different register, not warmth, not yet, but a kind of mutual recognition. Three people who had each, for different reasons, spent a great deal of their lives having things decided for them, sitting in a library at 7 in the morning to find out what had been decided now and whether they could do something about it. Right, Harry said. Let's find out what we're dealing with. He stood up, pulled the invisibility cloak from his bag. Daphne's eyes tracked to it with sharp interest and then deliberately away, which he noted, and looked at the restricted section. You two look for anything on pre-foundational British magic in the regular stacks. Bonding theory, old ritual magic, anything that mentions ardent is. He held up the cloak. I'll check the restricted section. You're going in there now? Daphne said. Madam Pants arrives at 7:15. I'll be out by 7:10. He pulled the cloak on and watched both of them adjust to his sudden disappearance with different reactions. Daphne blinked once and immediately started scanning the stacks with professional efficiency. Fleur stared at the space where he'd been with an expression that was more complicated, the bond clearly telling her he was still there even though her eyes said otherwise. Strange, Fleur murmured, more to herself than anyone. The cloak or the bond? Daphne asked, already moving toward the M section of the main stacks. Both. Fleur stood and moved in the opposite direction, toward the ancient history section, with purpose. Harry moved through the restricted section quickly and quietly, reading spines in the low torchlight. He knew how to do this: get in, scan fast, take what looked useful, get out. The restricted section at this hour smelled of old vellum and something sharper underneath, a chemical component in the preservation spells that he'd always associated with secrets being kept. He pulled 4 books with relevant-sounding titles: Magicis Fundamentis, a study of prescholastic binding, vinculum, chains, chords, and choices in ancient magical practice, an older text with a title in Latin he could only partially read, and a slim volume with no title on the spine that radiated a low, steady magical signature he found interesting. He tucked all 4 under the cloak and moved back out. 7:08. He reappeared next to the alcove bench with 2 minutes to spare, and found that Fleur had already returned with 3 books and Daphne with 2 more, which meant they were sitting in front of 9 volumes of magical theory at 7 in the morning the day after the Yule Ball, which Harry felt said something about all 3 of them but he wasn't sure what. Good haul, he said, spreading the restricted books on the bench. Fleur picked up the untitled slim volume immediately, with the instinct of someone who recognized a magical signature. She held it for a moment, feeling it, and then opened it to the first page. This is written in Old French, she said. And something older underneath, a magical script I don't read fully. But the French I can work with. She looked up at Harry. How did you know to take this one? It felt significant. The way the other books in there feel significant, they buzz, almost. This one was doing something quieter. He shrugged. I trust that. Fleur looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the book. It is called Lolene Ardent, she said. The Burning Bond. That's our book, Daphne said. They worked. For an hour and 20 minutes, while the library filled gradually with other early-rising students who studiously avoided the alcove corner that 3 tournament-adjacent people had clearly claimed, the 3 of them read, cross-referenced, and reported findings. It was, Harry thought, the most productive study session he'd ever participated in, because both Fleur and Daphne read with a speed and retention he couldn't match individually, and between the 3 of them the information came together fast. The Ardentis vinculum was, as Daphne had suggested, pre-foundational. Several texts placed its origin in the early medieval period of British magical history, before the International Statute of Secrecy, before the Hogwarts founding, during a period when magic had been practiced more openly and differently. It had not been created by any individual or institution. The best scholarly theory was that it had emerged organically, a property of places where magic was ancient and concentrated and where certain patterns of magical compatibility reached a threshold that the ambient magic of the place recognized and formalized. It's not a spell, Fleur said, leaning over the old French text with her braid falling over one shoulder. It describes it as a recognition. The magic of the place recognizes a configuration of people and ratifies it. Like, she searched for the word. Like a signature. A seal. On what? Harry asked. On the connection that already exists. She looked up. This is important. The vinculum does not create the connection. The text is very clear on this. It only activates in the presence of a connection that is already there, already real, and would likely have developed on its own given time. A silence that had several layers to it. It accelerated something that was already happening, Daphne said carefully. According to this. Fleur turned a page. And it does something else. It protects it. Stabilizes it. Prevents the normal process of connection being eroded by circumstance or time or, she paused on a word and translated carefully. Or by the interference of parties external to the bond. It locks it in, Harry said. It secures it. Which is different. She met his eyes. A lock can be broken. This cannot. The third silence was longer. Harry sat with that for a moment and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he wasn't panicking. He probably should have been, ancient binding magic, no way out, connected to two people he'd met in any meaningful sense last night. But the bond itself seemed to be doing something to the panic response, like a hand on a shoulder that steadied without restraining, and underneath the steadying he found a bedrock of something that felt like recognition. Fleur's word. The magic recognized them. And something in him, which he was only now noticing had been very quiet for a very long time, was not unhappy about that. He didn't say any of this. What does it actually do? He asked instead. Concretely. What are the effects? Daphne took over from one of the other volumes, Vinculum, which turned out to be academic but thorough. Shared awareness, she said. We already have that. Emotional resonance through the bond rather than direct thought transfer, the text describes it as understanding the shape of feeling without the content, which matches what you described this morning. Accurate, Fleur and Harry said simultaneously, then both paused. Enhanced magical awareness generally, Daphne continued, without commenting. The bond heightens the magical sensitivity of all three parties, essentially. Being connected to two other powerful magical signatures calibrates your own magic more finely. Like tuning instruments together before playing. That explains the window feeling, Harry said, half to himself. There are also what the text calls convergence moments, periods where the bond becomes active rather than passive, particularly in high-stress or high-danger situations. In those moments, the three parties are described as operating with a degree of coordination that exceeds what would be possible through conscious communication. She looked up from the text. In plain language, in a crisis, we would function as a unit without needing to plan it. Fleur had gone still. In the tournament, she said. Potentially. That is, she stopped. Started again. I am not comfortable with my actions in the tournament being influenced by us, Harry said. By anyone, Fleur said, firmly, and looked at him with eyes that were clear and direct and not apologetic. My performance in this competition is mine. I will not have it contaminated by shared magical states. Contaminated is a strong word, Harry said. It is the right word from where I am standing. You could also look at it as reinforced, Harry said. The text says heightened awareness. Finer calibration. That's not interference, it is still not my own, Fleur said, and the compression behind the words told him she was not arguing with him specifically but with the situation, and the situation was not going to argue back, and she knew that, which was probably the most frustrating part. Daphne was watching both of them with her hands folded on the text and an expression of someone who understood both positions and was choosing where to put her weight carefully. The convergence effect is involuntary during active danger, she said. The text is clear that it can't be suppressed in those circumstances. But there's a distinction between the passive ambient state, which is what we have right now, and the active convergence. The passive state is low-level and arguably within the range of normal ambient magical influence between people in close proximity. That is a very careful legal framing, Fleur said. Yes, Daphne agreed, without embarrassment. I'm trying to find a stable ground. Fleur looked at her. The mutual recalibration that had started last night continued. Harry could almost see it happening, the two of them updating their models of each other with each exchange. Why? Fleur asked, and it was a genuine question. What is your stake in this? The same as yours, Daphne said. I want to understand what I'm dealing with before anyone else defines it for me. A pause. And I think the three of us working together on this serves everyone better than two of us working around one. You included yourself in the one, Fleur said. I considered that both of you might prefer to exclude me. I am Slytherin and I approached Harry last night with a strategic proposal and I am fully aware of how that looks in retrospect. She said it with absolute steadiness, like someone reading a case file. But my original motivations are less relevant now than the fact that I'm in this bond and I would like to navigate it intelligently. I find that I respect your honesty more than I expected to, Fleur said. I find the same thing, Harry said. I am not seeking your approval, Daphne said, but something around her eyes said otherwise, just briefly, just enough. A commotion from the other side of the library made all three of them look up, not alarmed, just attentive, the bond's shared awareness registering the disturbance before any of them consciously processed the sound. A second year had knocked an entire shelf of books over and was having a complicated relationship with the avalanche, and Madame Pants was moving toward the scene with the energy of someone going to war. Harry noticed that all three of them had processed the sound and assessed it and dismissed it in the same moment, with the same economy of attention. That's new, he said quietly. The convergence in low-stress situations is described as subtle, Daphne said, equally quietly. Shared situational awareness. It will be more pronounced in the next few days as the bond fully establishes. How long does the establishment take? Fleur asked. 3 days to full activation, according to the text. She closed the volume carefully. We are in the middle of holiday. Most students go home for Christmas. The castle will be relatively empty. Convenient, Harry said. I don't think it's a coincidence, Daphne said, looking at the wall rather than either of them, with the look of someone thinking out loud that they don't usually do. The ball was last night. The holidays are now. We have 10 days before term resumes. The magic chose its moment. You think it planned this, Fleur said. I think planned implies intention in a way that probably doesn't apply to ambient castle magic. But I think old magic is responsive to conditions in ways that look like planning. She paused. My father would say that sufficiently advanced pattern recognition is indistinguishable from intent. Your father sounds interesting, Harry said. Something crossed Daphne's face that was too quick to read. He is, she said, simply. They were packing up the books, keeping the most useful, returning the ones that had proven redundant, when Harry felt the shift. It came from outside the library. A specific signature moving through the castle's corridors with purpose and deliberateness, at an hour when most people were not yet moving with purpose and deliberateness. Harry had felt that signature before, had been in proximity to it for 3 years, had learned to read it the way sailors learn to read a particular quality of wind. Dumbledore, he said. Both girls went still. Daphne finished packing in 2 smooth, unhurried movements and closed her bag. Fleur set the old French text down with care and looked at the library entrance with an expression that was professionally neutral. He felt the bond activate, Daphne said. It wasn't a question. He monitors the castle's ambient field, Harry said. I don't know how I know that, but I know it. He will want to speak with you, Fleur said, to Harry. Not us. You. Probably. Then we are not here, Daphne said. She stood, picked up her bag, and looked at both of them with the clarity of someone who has already made the decision and is informing the others rather than proposing. We were not together this morning. We have not spoken about this. You can speak with Dumbledore, but give him nothing specific, nothing about what we found, nothing about the Ardentis vinculum by name. And if he already knows what it is? Harry asked. Then you finding out that he already knows is useful information. She held his gaze. Trust the bond. If something feels wrong in that conversation, it will feel wrong through the resonance too. It was, Harry thought, a remarkable piece of advice from someone who had been an abstract background figure in his potions class 36 hours ago. I'll find you both afterward, he said. Fleur stood and adjusted her braid in one smooth motion, composure fully reassembled, and looked at Harry for a moment with an expression he was beginning to understand was her honest face, not the polished surface version, but the one underneath that she only let out when she wasn't thinking about it. Be careful, she said, and it came out more direct than she'd intended, with less of the careful distance she usually maintained. She left without waiting for a response, which Harry thought was her managing the fact that she'd said something more genuine than planned. Daphne was 3 steps behind her. At the alcove entrance she paused, turned back, and said, the untitled book from the restricted section, keep it. It has more than the others. Then she was gone. Harry sat in the alcove for a moment with the slim volume and the settled weight of the bond and the sound of Madame Pants scolding the second year in the distance, and prepared himself for a conversation with Albus Dumbledore before 8 in the morning. He wasn't afraid of it. That was new. The headmaster found him in the corridor outside the library, which suggested he'd known Harry's location before arriving, castle monitoring, Harry guessed, or a simple tracking charm on the bond's magical signature. He was wearing deep purple robes and had his hands clasped behind his back and his half-moon spectacles settled on his nose, and he looked like a man who had come for a gentle early morning walk and happened to be walking in a very specific direction. Harry, he said, warmly. I hoped I might find you. Could we talk? Sure, Harry said. They walked. Dumbledore led, not to his office, which Harry noted, but to a sitting room on the 3rd floor that Harry had found on the map before but never used. Comfortable chairs, a fireplace, a window with a good view. Someone had set up a tea service, which suggested this meeting had been anticipated. Harry sat down and didn't take any tea, and looked at the headmaster across the low table and waited. Dumbledore settled into his chair with the ease of someone entirely at home in themselves, and looked at Harry over his spectacles with those eyes that were always doing more than they appeared to. You've had an interesting evening, he said. The ball was good, Harry said. Better than I expected. Yes, I imagine it was. A small, warm pause. Harry, I want to speak with you about something that I believe occurred last night in the Great Hall. Something that may have surprised you, and that I want to make sure you understand correctly. What kind of something? A magical event. Old magic, pre-foundational, I believe, though I am still confirming my research. He folded his hands on his knee. There was a significant activation in the castle's ambient magical field last night. I am certain you felt it. I felt something, Harry said, carefully. Of course you did. You're perceptive, Harry, more than you're generally given credit for. He said it kindly, and Harry recognized it as a compliment deployed to establish goodwill, which recognition was new and slightly uncomfortable. What you felt is a very rare form of old magic that I believe was triggered by the particular concentrations of magical talent present during the ball. It is called, he paused. Well, it has several names. The ancient texts call it the Ardentis vinculum. There it was. He already knew the name. Harry kept his expression steady. That sounds significant. It is, rather. And it involves you specifically, I suspect you've already realized that. Dumbledore looked at him with the particular gentle gravity of someone delivering important news carefully. The short explanation is that the old magic of the castle has established a sort of resonance around you, a bond, one might say, with several other students present last night. I am working to understand the full nature of it, and I want you to come to me if you notice anything unusual in the coming days. Any strange sensations, shared perceptions, anything unusual, Harry repeated. Yes. It's important that I understand what is happening so that I can assist you appropriately. The warmth was perfect. The care was genuine. And underneath it, visible if you were looking for it, was the very precise architecture of a conversation designed to get Harry to report what he was experiencing to Dumbledore rather than to investigate it himself. Harry thought about what Daphne had said. He will categorize and manage it. You lose control the moment you bring it into official channels. He thought about what Fleur had said. It is presumptuous. Things that are mine because I chose them. He thought about his own voice from last night, articulating the difference between the tournament's mechanical magic and something older and more personal. I'll let you know if I notice anything, he said. Dumbledore smiled, and Harry held the smile's warmth at a distance that he hadn't known he could maintain before last night, and sipped the tea he'd decided after all to pour, and answered 3 more careful questions with 3 more careful non-answers, and the whole conversation lasted 17 minutes and left him with the precise amount of information he'd had before it started, minus the part he'd needed to give up. He gave up nothing. When it was over, he walked back through the castle and felt the bond orient him toward both Fleur and Daphne with the easy certainty of a compass finding north, and followed it without thinking, which was itself new, the lack of thinking, the lack of second-guessing, the simple fact of trust running through him like a current. He found them in a different alcove 2 floors down. They'd moved during his meeting, which was sensible. Fleur was sitting cross-legged on a window seat in a way that was completely at odds with her usual posture, with the old French book open on her knee and her braid over her shoulder, reading with the focused intensity of someone who has decided that this is the most important thing in the world for the next hour. Daphne was standing at the alcove entrance watching the corridor, calm as a cat, and she looked at Harry when he turned the corner with an eyebrow raised in inquiry. He already knew the name, Harry said. He gave me most of what we found this morning, or he tried to. Framed as helping. Made it clear he wants regular reports on what I'm experiencing. And you told him, Daphne began. Nothing specific. Nothing about the 2 of you, nothing about the name, nothing about what the bond is actually doing. A pause. Then Daphne said, good, and it had the quality of a word she'd been holding until she was sure. From the window seat, Fleur turned a page without looking up. He will try again, she said. He is patient and he will construct more opportunities. He will be kind every time and the kindness will be real, which is what makes it complicated. You sound like you know him, Harry said. I know the type, Fleur said, and looked up from the book with eyes that had a history in them he didn't have access to yet. Men who believe they are helping while managing. My grandmother had a saying for it. She returned to the book. The translation is approximately, the most comfortable cage is still a cage. Harry sat down on the other end of the window seat. Outside the window, the grounds were brilliantly white and still, the lake a dark mirror cut into the snow, the forbidden forest dark at its edges. We have 10 days before term, he said. 9 now, Daphne said. 9 days to understand this fully before we're back in the school's social ecosystem with all the complications that brings. He looked at the slim book in Fleur's hands. What are you finding? More than I expected, Fleur said. She set the book down on her knee, keeping her place with one finger, and looked at him and Daphne both with an expression that was working through something. The lean ardent, the burning bond, describes not just the mechanics of the vinculum but its purpose. Its original purpose. She paused. It was created, or emerged, the text is ambiguous, during a period of significant magical conflict. The medieval equivalent of a war. And it was understood to form around configurations of magical practitioners who, together, represented something the ambient magic of a place considered worth protecting. Worth protecting from what? Harry asked. Fleur looked at him steadily. From being destroyed before they could become what they were meant to become. The silence had weight in it. It formed around us, Daphne said, with the evenness of someone who is being very deliberate about their effect, because it considers us worth protecting. Yes. From something that wants to destroy us. Fleur's eyes moved to Harry. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Harry thought about a graveyard. He thought about a dream he'd had 3 times since September, fire and a dark figure and a cold green light, and had been categorizing as anxiety. He thought about a golden egg screaming. He thought about Bartemius Crouch Jr. wearing a dead man's face and watching him from across classrooms with one magical eye that never stopped moving. Yeah, he said. Okay. Okay. Fleur said. I mean, yeah. That tracks. He looked at the view outside the window. Something is coming. I've known that since my name came out of the goblet. The tournament is, it's not random. Someone put me in it for a reason, and the reason isn't for me to win a trophy. You knew this? Daphne asked, and something sharp had entered her voice, not anger, but something adjacent, the thing that comes before anger when information has been withheld. I suspected it. I didn't have evidence. He looked at her. I wasn't keeping it from you. I'm telling you now. A beat. Yes, she said. Fair. The sharpness resolved. Fleur had closed the book fully. She was looking at him with the honest face, the underneath one. We are not going to be allowed to simply study this calmly for 9 days, she said. Are we? Probably not, Harry agreed. Then we should move faster. She stood, and the motion had decision in it, kinetic and certain, like a door being opened. There is a chapter in this book about the convergent state. The one Daphne described, the involuntary coordination in crisis. The text says it can be voluntarily accessed with practice. Accessed, Harry said. Like a skill. Like a skill. And I would very much prefer, she said, with a precision that was the most Fleur thing she'd said yet, to understand a skill before I need it in a crisis, rather than the other way around. Daphne looked at her. You want to practice the bond. I want to understand it. On my terms. Before anyone else, Dumbledore, or whatever is coming, or the tournament, forces me into it on theirs. Her chin was up slightly, just enough. Is that a problem? No, Harry said immediately. Daphne considered for exactly the length of time it took her to complete a calculation. No, she said. It is not. Outside, the December morning had reached the point where the sky was fully light, pale and cold, the sun low and scattered. Somewhere in the castle, other students were beginning to wake up and navigate their Boxing Day with the pleasant vacancy of people with nowhere specific to be. The 3 of them had places to be. They gathered their things with the efficiency of people who are done thinking and ready to do, and moved out of the alcove into the corridor, and began to walk. The bond moved with them, not an imposition, not a chain. Something more like a current beneath the surface of a river, present and directional and theirs. Not because it had been given to them. Because they had decided to keep it. That distinction, Harry was beginning to understand, was the whole point. Chapter 3, The Language of Old Stone. The room of requirement opened for them on the second try. Harry had explained it as they walked. You had to walk past the stretch of blank wall 3 times, thinking clearly about what you needed. The first pass he'd thought about a practice space and gotten nothing. The second pass he'd thought more precisely, a room where 3 people can understand what connects them, safely, without interruption, and on the third pass, a door appeared in the stone with the quiet certainty of something that had been there all along, waiting for the right question. Fleur examined the door with the expression of someone evaluating a contract before signing. This castle, she said, and the way she said it contained an entire conversation about Beauxbatons, which was ancient and beautiful and had enchantments of its own that she understood, versus Hogwarts, which was ancient and strange and kept producing new variables. Hogwarts has opinions, Harry said. I've stopped being surprised by them. You were surprised last night, Daphne said, stepping past both of them through the doorway. "Fair," he said, and followed. The room had configured itself as a wide circular space with stone floors that were warmer than they should have been given no visible heat source, low comfortable furniture arranged without particular formality, and walls lined not with books but with something more interesting, what appeared to be sections of the castle's own structure made visible, the stone cut away to show the layered magical architecture within. Veins of something luminous ran through the rock in branching patterns, like a circulatory system, and they were active, pulsing faintly, carrying light in slow rhythmic beats. Fleur had stopped just inside the door, looking at the walls. "That is the castle's magical field," she said. "Visible." "The room showed us what we needed to see," Daphne said, moving to examine the nearest wall with the focused attention of someone who had wanted to do exactly this for some time. The luminous veins were more concentrated in some areas than others, clustered thickly near the floor, branching upward, with knots of particular intensity at certain points. These concentration points. She traced one without touching it. Ley nodes, possibly. "Power junctions," Fleur said, moving to the other side of the room with the same quality of attention, her professional assessment running on the architecture the way it had run on Harry's pumpkin juice inventory last night, thorough, methodical, and faster than it looked. "We have them at Beauxbatons. The entire palace is constructed around a primary node. You feel it in the foundation magic." She paused at a particularly bright cluster. "But here there are, many. A network." Harry was looking at the center of the room, where the floor stones had a different quality than the rest, older, he thought, though he couldn't have said what made him think so. They were darker, more worn, with faint markings that might have been incidental variation in the stone or might have been deliberate. Might have been very old writing. He crouched down and looked at the markings. "Come look at this," he said. They came. Daphne crouched beside him immediately, studying the marks with focused economy. Fleur stood over both of them, which worked with her height and her angle, and the three of them formed a natural configuration around the marked stones, a triangle, Harry noticed without pointing it out. The markings were in something that wasn't quite runes and wasn't quite script, an older system, pre-runic possibly, the symbols rounded rather than angular, worn down but present. "Elder Futhark is angular," Daphne said. "These predate it." "The Ogham script is older," Fleur said. "But this is not Ogham either. This is," she made a sound that wasn't quite frustration and wasn't quite recognition. "Do you know what it says?" Harry asked. "I know what it feels like," she said, which was not an answer he'd expected. "My grandmother's house in the Dordogne. The Singing Stones. They had markings." She studied the floor with something personal and careful in her expression. "She told me the old magic doesn't use language the way we do. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in configuration. Pattern. The meaning is in the arrangement." "Like music," Harry said. She looked at him. "Exactly like music." Daphne's head turned to look at both of them, and Harry could see her storing this, not just the information, but the exchange, the fact that he and Fleur had arrived at a metaphor together in 2 steps. She was still cataloging. Still building her model. "Can we read the configuration?" Harry asked Fleur. "My grandmother could. I can try." She sat down cross-legged on the floor with complete unself-consciousness, which Harry noted because it was so unlike the polished public version of Fleur, and placed both hands flat on the stone near the markings without touching them directly. She closed her eyes. Harry sat down too, on the other side of the markings. Daphne remained crouching, watching. What happened next was quiet and strange and not at all dramatic, which Harry thought was probably why it worked. Fleur sat with her hands near the stone and her eyes closed, and nothing visible happened for about 30 seconds. Then the luminous veins in the walls shifted, not drastically, not with any fanfare, just a subtle redistribution of the light, the way currents shift in water when something disturbs the surface. The bond resonance in Harry's chest adjusted with it, deepening. Then Fleur opened her eyes, and her expression had changed in a way that was hard to name, something between recognition and sadness and something that wasn't surprise but was close to wonder. "It says we were late," she said quietly. "Late for what?" Daphne asked. "Late to arrive here. The mark is, anticipatory. It is the mark of awaiting, not a completed thing." She took her hands off the stone. "This pattern has been here for a very long time. Longer than the school. And it has been waiting for a configuration that matched it." She looked up. "We matched it." 3 people, Daphne said. 3 people. The pattern is triadic. 2 points and a center, with lines between all 3. She looked at Harry. "You are not the center because of the shape. You are the center because of what you carry." "The prophecy," Harry said, with the flat effect of someone who has had a long time to be uncomfortable with that word. "I don't know about a prophecy," Fleur said. "I know what the stone felt like. It felt like, weight. Old weight. The kind that has been placed somewhere because it is too heavy to carry." She looked at him with something that was not pity. She wasn't built for pity, but was honest. "You have been carrying something for a very long time without knowing what it is." "I know what it is," Harry said. "I just don't know what to do about it." "That is different," she said, with the precision of someone for whom distinctions matter. "And it is more honest than most people would be." Daphne stood up from her crouch, brushing off her robes with one smooth motion, and moved to one of the comfortable chairs. She sat down with the book, the slim, untitled one Harry had taken from the restricted section, which had turned out to be Lolene Ardent under an illusion on its spine, and opened it to a marked page. "We've established what the bond is and approximately why it formed," she said. "We haven't addressed what it does to us going forward, specifically." She looked up. Fleur said there was a chapter on voluntary convergence. "Toward the back," Fleur said, still on the floor, which apparently was fine for now. She hadn't moved to get up and Harry wasn't going to comment on it. "But before that, there is something else I didn't finish translating this morning." She held out her hand for the book. Daphne passed it across without hesitation, which Harry noted as a small but real thing, the deliberate setting aside of ownership in favor of utility. Fleur found the page. The old French was dense and her lips moved slightly as she worked through it, not uncertain, just thorough. "There is a passage about what the text calls les témoins de la liaison," she said. "The witnesses of the bond. People who exist in proximity to those in the vinculum and who are aware of it." "Witnesses can mean different things," Daphne said carefully. "The text distinguishes them by intent." Fleur ran her finger along the line. "A benign witness is someone who knows of the bond and accepts its existence without seeking to influence or use it. The word is a stranger dangereux, dangerous outsider, is someone who becomes aware of the bond and views it as a resource to be accessed or a threat to be eliminated." "Dumbledore," Harry said. "Possibly." Fleur looked up. "The text is very clear that the bond is self-protective in response to dangerous witnesses. If someone attempts to interfere, to break the vinculum, to use its power for their own purposes, to access its convergent state without the consent of all 3 parties, the bond responds." "How?" Daphne asked. "Defensively." A pause. "It describes the defensive response as significant. Un tempête de feu vieux, a storm of old fire." She looked at both of them with an expression that was assessing whether they understood what that meant. Harry understood. "So we're not just protected by the bond," he said. "The bond itself is dangerous to anyone who tries to mess with it." "Yes." "Good," Harry said, and meant it. Daphne pressed her lips together in a way that said she agreed but was choosing a more measured expression of the agreement. "That changes the calculus around Dumbledore considerably," she said. "Not that he would attempt to break it forcibly, he is not that kind of person. But he may try more subtle interventions. Managed separation. Framing the bond as a problem that needs solving. He already started that," Harry said. "This morning. I want to help you understand it correctly. He said the last part with a precise mimic of Dumbledore's warm, careful cadence that made Daphne's almost smile reappear and made Fleur let out a sharp sound that was unambiguously a laugh, quickly suppressed. "You do that well," Fleur said. 3 years of sitting across from him in his office, Harry said. "You pick things up. What will you tell him going forward?" Daphne asked. "What we decide to tell him. Together." He looked at both of them. "This is a joint decision. What goes out from us and what doesn't, we agree on it first." The way both of them responded to that was interesting. Fleur's posture changed subtly, the shoulders dropped by a fraction, the set of her jaw eased slightly. Some tension he hadn't consciously noticed was gone. Daphne's expression shifted in that way it had, the structural precursor to something warmer, and she looked at the book in her hands for a moment before looking back at him. "Agreed," she said. "Agreed," Fleur said. They spent the next 2 hours working through the book systematically, with Fleur translating, Daphne synthesizing, and Harry asking questions that kept arriving at angles neither of them had approached from, practical questions, blunt questions, the sort of questions that cut through theoretical framing to get at what something actually meant in practice. Fleur stopped looking at his questions with mild surprise after the first 40 minutes. Daphne stopped framing her syntheses as explanations directed primarily at him by about the same point. They worked like 3 people who had been working together for a long time, and the bond hummed steadily beneath it all. The voluntary convergence chapter was, as Fleur had said, toward the back of the text. It was also the densest section, not in vocabulary but in concept, and Harry found it useful that Fleur translated aloud in a way that preserved the old French rhythm even as it became English, because the rhythm was doing something to the meaning. The convergent state, as the text described it, was the bond's active mode. The passive mode, ambient shared awareness, emotional resonance, heightened magical sensitivity, existed continuously once the bond was established. But convergence was different. Convergence was when all 3 parties aligned their intent, their focus, and their magical output into a single coordinated state, at which point the 3 individual magical signatures ceased to be separate and became something the text called un troisième chose, a third thing. Not a blending. Not a flattening of individuality into some averaged middle. A combination that produced something that was not simply the sum of the parts but a new thing, with properties that none of the 3 individuals possessed alone. "What properties?" Harry asked. Fleur scanned ahead in the text. Her expression as she read was doing something he'd come to recognize, the look of someone whose model of a situation is being revised significantly and who is deciding how to present the revision. "The text describes several," she said carefully. "Magical penetration, the ability to work through defenses that would stop any individual practitioner. Temporal perception, it describes the convergent state as perceiving slightly ahead of real time, anticipating rather than reacting." She paused. "And something it calls le cœur de feu antique, the heart of ancient fire. I don't have a clean translation for that one. The concept is, it is the magic of very old things, the kind that predates classification and intent. It is not light or dark in the way we describe those. It is older than that distinction." "Wild magic," Daphne said quietly. "The text would not call it that. But yes. Approximately." Harry sat with this for a moment, turning it over. The Triwizard Tournament. A graveyard in a dream. A dark figure with red eyes and a cold high laugh. The convergent state producing magic that predated the light and dark distinction, magic that was something outside the framework of everything that was coming. "We need to practice it," he said. "I agree," Fleur said, which was the 3rd time she'd agreed with him today, and each time had the quality of something that surprised her slightly. "Today?" Daphne asked. "Why not today?" Harry said. Daphne looked at the room around them, the visible magical architecture in the walls, the warm floor, the space that Hogwarts had made specifically for this purpose. "The room is already configured for it," she said. "Then let's not waste the room." The text's description of voluntary convergence was practically oriented, which Harry appreciated. It was not mystical. It did not require meditation or ritual or any of the elaborate preparation that bounded magic usually demanded. What it required was three things: proximity, intent, and willingness. Proximity they had. Intent required agreement, all three parties focused on the same specific aim, without divergence or reservation. Willingness was the one the text spent the most words on, because willingness was not the same as trying and not the same as allowing. It was something more specific, closer to choosing without resistance, a state of active and open reception that was harder to achieve than it sounded because it required setting aside the instinct to manage and control, which was, Harry noted with dark amusement, something all three of them had in abundance. So the obstacle, he said, is that we're all very bad at not being in control. Speak for yourself, Fleur said. He looked at her. She was sitting on the floor with the book in a posture that radiated elegant command of the immediate environment, wearing the composed face like it was structural, and she looked back at him with eyes that knew exactly what he meant and was declining to confirm it. Daphne? Harry said. I am famously bad at not being in control, Daphne said, without any apparent distress about this. Right. Harry stood up. Okay. So we're doing this the hard way. There is an easy way? Fleur asked. No, he said. I just wanted to establish that. He moved to the center of the room, to the marked stones, and stood on them. He could feel the castle's ambient magic more strongly here. The luminous veins in the walls were brighter near his feet, as though something below the floor was responding to his position. He thought about what Fleur had said. The center is not the shape. The center is what you carry. Whatever he carried, the weight, the prophecy, the thing with red eyes at the end of a corridor he kept seeing in dreams, he could feel it now, down in the foundation of him where he'd been keeping it without fully acknowledging it. It wasn't fear. It had moved past fear into something more elemental, something that was simply the knowledge of an approaching thing and the need to be ready for it. He looked at Fleur and Daphne. I'm going to tell you something before we try this, he said. Because the text says intent requires honesty, and I think it means more than just the moment. Both of them were still, watching him. I was entered into this tournament by someone who wants me at the end of it. Not to win, to be used. I don't know the full plan, but I know the shape of it. He kept his voice even, not performing calm but actually feeling it, the bond doing something to the fear response, taking the jagged edges off it. And what's coming at the end isn't just a dangerous task. It's worse than that. He held their gaze. I'm not afraid of it. I need you to know that, because the convergence needs honest intent, and my honest intent includes knowing what this bond is actually going to have to do. Fleur looked at him for a long moment. You have always known it would be bad, she said. Not a question. Since September. Something's wrong with this tournament and I've been waiting to find out what. The false moody, Daphne said. Harry and Fleur both looked at her. Daphne's expression was composed but her eyes were doing a rapid movement, the internal recalibration of someone who has been carrying a piece of information and has just decided to put it on the table. Alastair Moody has been under investigation by my father's legal contacts since October, she said. Something in his magical signature was flagged by a ward monitoring firm my father uses. The signature profile doesn't match Moody's historical aura records. She paused. I came to the Yule Ball intending to tell you this, as part of the arrangement I proposed. The magical bond changed the sequencing of the conversation, but the information didn't disappear. Harry stared at her. You knew Moody wasn't Moody. I knew something was wrong with whoever was presenting as Moody. I did not know who or why. She met his gaze with steady eyes. Now I suspect Polyjuice and someone with a specific interest in your performance in this tournament. Someone who put your name in the goblet, Fleur said, very quietly. Yes. The silence had a specific quality, not shock, because all three of them had been operating from a premise of something is wrong for long enough that confirmation wasn't shocking, but rather the quality of a picture coming into focus. Pieces that had been individually troubling becoming a shape that was troubling in a more coherent and therefore more actionable way. "We need to address the moody situation," Daphne said. "But not today and not without more information. We note it and we continue." "Agreed," Harry said. He looked at them both and felt the triangle, the 3 points, the lines between, the configuration that Old Stone had been waiting for. Whatever was coming, it had made a mistake. It had engineered this tournament to put Harry somewhere vulnerable, isolated, surrounded by institutional magic designed to compel rather than protect. And in doing so it had put him in a castle that had very old opinions about certain configurations of people, and the castle had gone ahead and acted on those opinions. He thought, whatever you were planning, you didn't plan for this. It was the most satisfying thing he'd thought in months. "Right," he said. "Let's try the convergence." The first attempt was, they agreed afterward, a partial success. They had positioned themselves at the 3 points of the marked triangle, Harry at the apex, Fleur and Daphne at the base corners, and attempted the state of willing without controlling that the text described. Harry had found it easier than expected, which surprised him and then didn't, because he'd spent 4 years being moved by events and not particularly managing to control them, which meant he'd had a great deal of involuntary practice at releasing the illusion of control. Daphne had been harder. She'd gotten there, but you could see it costing her, the careful relaxation of a jaw that had been tight, the deliberate opening of hands that had closed. When she got there, it was clean and full, which Harry suspected was because Daphne was thorough. Fleur had been unexpectedly difficult, which seemed to surprise her most of all. She had composure that was so practiced it had become reflex, and reflex was hard to distinguish from genuine release. She'd made 2 attempts that looked right from outside but the bond told Harry were surface rather than depth, and on the third she'd made a sound through her nose that was half irritation and half surrender and done something with her face that stripped it down to something younger and more real, and that was when it worked. When all 3 of them hit the state simultaneously, the bond went from a resonance to a chord to something that had no musical metaphor, something that simply was, fully and 3-dimensionally, the way a smell fills a room all at once rather than building from a direction. The luminous veins in the walls blazed. Not painfully. Not alarmingly. But with a brilliance that was unmistakably responsive, the castle itself registering something it recognized, the way a tuning fork resonates when its frequency is struck nearby. Harry felt Fleur and Daphne the way he felt his own hands. Not their thoughts, nothing that specific, but their presence, their state, their readiness. Fleur's state was kinetic and controlled and had the quality of drawn metal, tension held in perfect balance. Daphne's state was structured and very still, like the surface of a lake with enormous depth under it. His own state, he noticed in a distant and interested way, felt like something that had been waiting to be this size. They held it for approximately 30 seconds before Fleur broke first, not because she wanted to, Harry could feel, but because the intensity was new and her instinct was to protect against new intensities by withdrawing. The blazing in the walls subsided. The chord resolved back into 3 separate notes, present but distinct. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Fleur said, from her position at the base corner, "Murd." "Yeah," Harry said. "That was 30 seconds, Daphne said." She was looking at her own hands, which was the most unself-conscious thing Harry had seen her do. 30 seconds is significant for a first attempt, Fleur said, with a precision that was working to reclaim the composure she'd had to set down to get the convergence. The text does not specify how long the trained practitioners in its examples could hold it. The text was written in the 14th century, Daphne said. The practitioners it references had presumably been working together for years. Then 30 seconds is not bad, Harry said. No, Fleur agreed. It is not bad. They tried again. The second attempt held for nearly 2 minutes, and when it released Harry had to stand still for a moment because the world had a slightly different texture from where he was standing, the way a room looks different when you've moved the furniture and haven't quite adjusted to the new configuration. The bond was more settled now, the practice doing what practice always did, wearing a groove in the stone. After the 4th attempt, Daphne sat down with the practical decisiveness of someone who has decided that more is not better and looked at both of them with an expression that was flushed and clear and more open than anything Harry had seen from her yet. "We should stop for today," she said. "The text says overextension in the early establishment period creates instability in the bond's passive state. We need the passive state stable." "She is right," Fleur said, from her corner, where she was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and her composure reassembled but her eyes still carrying the afterquality of the convergence, something that was brighter and less managed than usual. "Stopping," Harry said. He sat down on the warm floor stones. "Good work." "We are not in a class," Fleur said, "but without heat." "I know. I meant it." She looked at him, and the afterquality in her eyes had something in it he didn't have a word for yet. Something that acknowledged the meant it with more weight than the words themselves carried. Daphne was already making notes on a folded piece of parchment she'd produced from somewhere. "Tomorrow morning. Same time, same room. We continue the practice." She looked up. "And we need to address the moody situation. I have contact information for my father's ward monitoring firm. I'll write today." "You're writing your father's business contacts over the holiday," Harry said. "I'm writing my father's business contacts over the holiday," she confirmed, without any indication that this was unusual. "How many people know we're spending the holidays together?" Fleur asked, looking at neither of them specifically. "Ron knows I'm doing research," Harry said. "He won't be surprised. He'll probably be relieved. He wanted me to come back to the borough but felt guilty asking because of the tournament. No one from Beauxbatons will have noticed I'm not spending every moment with them," Fleur said, with a dryness that contained a full chapter about her relationship with the Beauxbatons social dynamic. "They believe I am practicing independently." "Which you are," Daphne said. "Precisely. My dormitory won't mark my early mornings," Daphne said. "I have a reputation for studying before breakfast that predates this year." "So we have cover," Harry said. "We have plausible normalcy," Daphne corrected. "Which is not the same thing but serves the same function." They stood to leave, and Harry felt the room shift around them, the warmth of it, the walls with their living light, the marked floor. He turned back at the door and looked at the luminous veins, which had subsided to their ambient pulse but were still brighter than they'd been when the three of them had entered. The room had settled around their use of it. Left a mark. He thought about old magic that had been waiting for a specific configuration, and about ancient stones that spoke in pattern rather than language, and about three people who had each, separately, for separate reasons, carrying separate weight, arrived at a dance on a December night and been recognized. "One more thing," he said, before they separated. Both of them looked back. "Whatever is coming, the third task, the end of the tournament, whatever Crouch as Moody is building toward," he held their gaze with both of them simultaneously, which the bond made easier, a kind of broad attention that didn't have to choose a direction. "I'm not walking into it alone. I want to be clear about that. Not because I need backup, because we're going to do this together and I don't want either of you surprised by that when the time comes." A silence. Fleur looked at him for a long time with an expression that was many things at once, and then she said, in a voice that had set aside all of its performance, "We." "Just that." Daphne looked at the floor for exactly one moment and then looked up with clear, direct eyes. "Agreed," she said. And then she said something Harry hadn't expected. "Thank you for saying it explicitly." "I meant it explicitly," he said. She nodded once, the way she'd nodded this morning when he was already at the alcove, the motion that might have been approval, and this time Harry was sure of it. They stepped out of the room of requirement into the corridor, which was cold and normal and smelled of stone and distant food from the kitchens, and went their separate ways for the morning. Harry walked back to Gryffindor Tower and felt the bond settle around the day's work, practice and discovery and honesty and the preliminary shape of something that was not yet fully formed but was more real than most things in his life. He passed a window and looked out at the grounds and the lake and the forbidden forest at its dark edge, and thought about what was sitting at the end of the tournament like a trap with a patient spring. He thought, "You built this trap for one person, He thought, that was your mistake. He climbed the stairs to Gryffindor Tower and nodded at the fat lady and went to find Ron, who was eating toast in the common room and looked enormously relieved to see him, and said immediately, "You didn't do anything dangerous this morning, right?" "I did research," Harry said. "Right," Ron said, in the voice of someone who had learned not to define dangerous too narrowly. "Toast?" "Yeah," Harry said. "Thanks." He sat down with his best friend and ate toast and answered questions about the Yule Ball with the selective honesty of someone who was keeping specific things private for specific reasons, and felt the morning settle into something ordinary. The bond hummed quietly below everything, present and alert, a third thing that was more than its parts. Elsewhere in the castle, Daphne was writing a letter in a precise and careful hand to a ward monitoring firm in Edinburgh whose senior partner owed her father 3 significant favors, asking for a specific set of historical magical signature records for an active Hogwarts staff member. Elsewhere in the castle, Fleur was in the Beauxbatons practice area doing wand work of a kind that wasn't on any curriculum, older forms, ancestral magic, the techniques her grandmother had taught her before she was old enough for a wand. She moved through them with precision and fury and a quality of attention that was newer than yesterday, calibrated by the morning's convergence to a frequency she hadn't known she had access to. And in a specific corridor on the 4th floor, behind a door that appeared to be a broom cupboard, a magical eye rotated in a borrowed face and observed the ambient magical field of the castle, and saw that it had changed significantly in the 12 hours since the Yule Ball, and was calculating what this meant for a plan that had been built around a single boy and had not accounted for ancient stone with its own ideas. The castle breathed. The bond held. The trap at the end of the tournament waited with the patience of something designed by someone who believed they had thought of everything. They hadn't. Chapter 4, What the Tournament Knows. The Golden Egg screamed. Harry had heard it before, that banshee wail that had driven everyone within earshot out of rooms and covered ears and given him 3 weeks of near sleepless nights before Cedric, decent person that he was, had dropped the hint about baths and water. He'd taken the hint, gone to the prefect's bathroom, and heard the merpeople's song, mournful and beautiful and carrying a message he'd been trying to not think about too hard ever since. Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground. He stood in the middle of the room of requirement on the 5th day of the holidays and held the egg open and let the scream fill the space, and watched Fleur and Daphne's faces as they heard it for the first time. Fleur went very still. The scream bounced off the walls and she absorbed it with an expression that was doing active work, processing the sound, the frequency, what it meant, what it was asking, and Harry watched the moment she understood cross her face like a weather change. Daphne's jaw tightened. She'd brought parchment and a quill as a matter of habit, and the quill had gone motionless in her hand, and she was looking at the egg with the focused attention of someone for whom understanding and dreading something are not incompatible states. Harry closed the egg. The silence afterward was the particular silence of a room that has just been very loud. The lake, Fleur said. February 24th, Harry said. She looked at him. You already knew. Since October. The merpeople's song when you open it underwater. Come seek us where our voices sound. He set the egg down on the nearest surface. They're going to take something, someone, that each champion values, and hold them in the lake. We go in and get them back. Fleur's expression shifted through something that was complicated and landed on the dangerous side of composed. Who? She asked, quietly. Someone each champion would sorely miss, Harry said, using the exact phrasing from the clue. For me it'll probably be Ron. For Cedric, Cho. For Victor, Hermione, Daphne said. Harry looked at her. Yeah. Hermione. He paused. For you. Fleur looked at the closed egg. My sister, she said. Gabrielle. She is 8 years old. She said it with a flatness that was not calm but was what calm looks like when it's the only available option. She came to the tournament to watch. My mother brought her. A pause. She is 8 years old and they will put her in a lake in Scotland in February. The room was quiet. Harry felt the anger come through the bond from Fleur's direction, not compressed this time, not the managed fury of the morning after the ball. This was different, wider, with a cold edge to it that was more dangerous than heat. "They won't hurt them," he said. "The hostages." "The clue says," "I know what the clue says," Fleur said. "It says past an hour the others will be left where they lie. The assumption is that we retrieve them before an hour." She looked at him with eyes that were stripped of all the performance. "And if I do not reach Gabrielle in time?" "I will," Harry said. Both of them looked at him. "If you can't reach her," he said, with the simplicity of someone stating a fact, "I will. I'll make sure she gets out." Fleur stared at him for a long moment. The anger didn't go away, it was still there through the bond, still cold and certain, but something shifted beside it, something that was not the anger and was not easily categorized. "You cannot promise that," she said. "You have your own hostage to retrieve." "I can do both," Harry said. "The lake doesn't scare me. And I'm not going to let an 8-year-old sit on the lake floor because of a tournament timing mechanism." He picked up the egg again and turned it in his hands. "This isn't up for debate. If you run into trouble down there, I'll handle it." "You are very," Fleur started, and stopped. "Stubborn," Daphne offered. "I was going to say confident," Fleur said, with an edge of something that wasn't quite dry and wasn't quite warm but existed in the space between. "I prefer accurate," Harry said. Daphne had started writing on her parchment. "We have 7 weeks," she said, with the focused efficiency of someone who processes emotion better when her hands are doing something. "That's enough time to prepare properly. The question is what form that preparation takes." She looked up. "What are you planning to use?" "Gillyweed, bubblehead charm, something else?" "I found out about gillyweed," Harry said. "Haven't sourced it yet." "I'll use the bubblehead charm," Fleur said. "It is more reliable for precision work underwater. Gillyweed has a variable duration." "I can source gillyweed through Neville," Harry said. "His botanical knowledge is extraordinary if you can get past the fact that he doesn't realize it." He paused. "Daphne?" She looked up from her parchment. "I'm not a champion," she said. "I won't be in the water." "No, but the convergence," Harry stopped. Thought. "The convergence effect in high-danger situations. If it activates while I'm in the lake, it will," Fleur said, with certainty. The text was clear. "Active danger triggers involuntary convergence." "Then you'll both feel what I feel down there," Harry said. Daphne set down her quill with a deliberateness that said this was information she'd known was coming and had been deciding how to handle. "I'll be on the bank," she said. "Observing. If the convergence activates, I'll have access to what's happening below. I can be a relay point." She looked at Harry. "Information gets to me through the bond. I can observe the pattern of the task from the bank, see what other champions are doing, monitor time. And feed it back through the bond," Harry said. "If the involuntary convergence works the way the text describes, yes." She said it with the evenness of someone laying out a plan, but underneath it Harry could feel through the bond a quality of tension that was different from her usual focused control, something that was less about calculation and more about the particular anxiety of being the person who stays on the bank. He understood it intuitively. Being the one who stays on the bank when the other two go into danger. Being the point of the triangle that holds the thread rather than follows it. "You're not the backup," he said. "You're not the one who stays behind. You're the one who holds the whole picture." He met her eyes. "That's not a lesser role." Daphne looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her quill. "No," she said. "It's not." And went back to her notes. Fleur was watching this exchange with an expression he was beginning to recognize, the one she had when something revised her model of the situation in a direction she hadn't expected, and she was deciding whether to acknowledge the revision or absorb it silently. She chose silent absorption, which was her default, but the absorption was thorough. They worked through the task logistics for another 2 hours, moving through it with the methodical pace of people who are not panicking and are specifically choosing not to panic, which is a different thing from not having reasons to. Fleur had knowledge of underwater magical environments from her French coastal background. She'd swum in magically charged sea waters since childhood and understood water-breathing charms at a level that went past theoretical. Harry had the tunnel knowledge. He'd been in that lake, he understood the mere people and their particular relationship with the school, and he had the direct action quality that meant when something unexpected appeared he would deal with it rather than calculate his response. Daphne had everything else. The timekeeping, the task structure analysis, the knowledge of what the other champions were likely to do and how that would affect the underwater dynamics, the observational framework that would make her the bond's external eye. 3 people, 3 functions, 1 task. The bond was not incidental to this. It was the architecture. On the 6th day of the holidays, Bartemius Crouch Jr. came to watch Harry practice. Harry didn't know this at the time. He found out later, and the finding out was its own event, but the watching happened first on a Tuesday afternoon when Harry was in the castle's lower courtyard running drills with his wand, not homework, not preparation for a specific charm, just the kind of wand work you do when something in you needs to move and magic is the most efficient way to move it. He'd been doing it for 40 minutes when he felt the observation. It wasn't the bond, he'd know the bond's quality anywhere now, knew Fleur's kinetic alertness and Daphne's structured depth the way you know the weight of familiar objects. This was external. A gaze with intention behind it, directed from somewhere above and to his left. He didn't look up. He kept running the drills, rotating through shield charms, disillusionment exercises, a sequence of elemental conjurations he'd been developing since September that had no formal name and weren't in any curriculum, but he adjusted. Spread his awareness. Used the elevated magical sensitivity the bond had calibrated in him. The watcher was on the 2nd floor parapet. 1 figure. The magical signature was, wrong. Not wrong in a way he could have articulated to anyone before this month, but the bond had sharpened his perception to the point where he could feel the seam between the signature's surface and its depth, the way you feel a join in stone under your fingers. The surface said moody. The depth said something else entirely. Harry ran his drills to their natural end. He lowered his wand. He looked up at the parapet. The figure was gone. He stood in the courtyard for a moment, feeling the wrongness dissipate with the watcher's departure, and thought about Daphne's words. Something in his magical signature was flagged. The signature profile doesn't match Moody's historical aura records. He needed to tell them. Tonight. He found them at their usual alcove in the library at 6 in the evening. They'd established an unspoken evening session in addition to the morning practice, more flexible and less structured, the kind of meeting that was as much about processing the day as it was about specific work. Fleur was reading, her feet up on the bench in the un-Fleur posture she'd apparently decided was acceptable in private. Daphne was writing. Harry arrived 3 minutes after Daphne and 7 after Fleur, which was the approximate pattern that had established itself, and both of them looked up at him and read him before he said anything. Something happened, Daphne said. Moody watched me practice today, Harry said, sitting down. From the parapet. I felt the signature seam, exactly what you described. The surface and the depth don't match. Daphne set down her quill. Could you feel what was underneath? Not clearly. Wrong, but not legible. He looked at her. You contacted the ward monitoring firm? 2 days ago. I'm waiting for their response. She looked at him with the particular expression of someone who is deciding how much to say. I also wrote my father. Harry paused. About this? About the tournament and its irregularities. In terms that were, diplomatic. She held his gaze. My father is a significant figure in the British magical legal community. He has access to records that private firms don't. If something is wrong with whoever is presenting as Moody, my father can find the original with more authority than a monitoring firm. You trust your father with this? Harry asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. Daphne was quiet for a moment. "I trust my father's competence," she said, with a care in the phrasing that suggested competence and trustworthiness were not identical in her assessment. "He will investigate correctly and completely. What he chooses to do with the information will be his decision, and his decision will be shaped by Greengrass interests, which are not identical to our interests." She met Harry's eyes. "I told him enough to prompt investigation. Not enough to reveal the bond or our joint preparation for the task." "Smart," Fleur said, from the bench, without looking up from her book. "I thought so," Daphne said, with just enough dryness to be interesting. Harry thought about it. The Greengrass family was old magical blood, deeply embedded in the ministry's formal structures without being openly political in the Death Eater way. He knew that much from context and observation. Cyrus Greengrass moving through the system on the basis of an irregular Hogwarts staff member was the kind of thing that would produce results without requiring anyone to explain ancient binding magic to anyone. "Good call," he said. Daphne absorbed the agreement with a nod. "The response should come in the next 2 days. In the meantime," Fleur said, turning a page, "we continue practice." She looked up from her book. "I made progress on the extended hold this afternoon. 40 minutes. Harry stared at her. "Alone?" "You cannot achieve convergence alone," she said, with the reasonableness of someone explaining something basic. "I was working on my component, the willingness state. Sustaining it independently so that when we practice together, my end of the convergence is stable for longer." She looked at him with a slight tilt of her head. "You should do the same." "I do the same," Harry said. "I just do it while running drills, so it looks like wand work." Fleur looked at the courtyard in the middle distance with an expression that was updating itself. "Wand work while sustaining a preconvergent state," she said. "That's advanced. I didn't plan it that way. It just started happening when I practiced after the first convergence." He shrugged. "The bond changed how my magic feels when I use it. Wider, like we discussed. Running the drills in that wider state is," he searched for the word. "Natural," Daphne supplied, looking at him with careful eyes. "Yeah. Natural." Fleur held his gaze for a moment with the underneath expression, the honest one, and something moved in it that she let stay there rather than managing it away, which was new. The bond carried the shape of what she was feeling, and the shape was complicated, acknowledgement of something, the specific feeling of a model being significantly revised. She went back to her book. Harry sat down and tried to read his own book and found a sentence interesting for the 3rd time without retaining a word of it. On the 7th morning, the room did something unexpected. They were midway through the second convergence attempt, it was holding well, a clean triangular alignment, the luminous walls blazing with their responsive brightness, when the floor did something none of them had asked it to do. The marked stones in the center began to glow. Not with the passive luminescence of the castle's ambient magic, but with the specific warm gold of something activated, something awake, something that had been waiting for exactly the quantity of aligned magical attention they were currently providing and had decided the threshold had been reached. The markings lifted. Not physically, the stone didn't move, but the symbols rose out of the surface in a kind of dimensional visibility, 3-dimensional shapes made of light, and arranged themselves in the center of the room at eye height. The convergence held, which it shouldn't have, the distraction should have broken it. Instead the surprise seemed to feed it, or rather the shared nature of the surprise, the perfect simultaneity of all 3 of them registering the impossible light sculptures at precisely the same moment, generated a kind of resonant spike that the convergence rode rather than collapsed under. The symbols were unmistakably the same as the floor markings, but at full scale they were readable. Not in any language Harry or Daphne spoke. But Fleur made a sound. "La configuration," she breathed. The symbols arranged themselves into a pattern and the pattern was triadic and the 3 points of it were differentiated, each had a distinct character, a distinct quality of light. One was kinetic, in constant motion, never settling into a final form. One was deep and structured, a kind of geometric precision that built in layers. And the central one, Harry was looking at the central one and it was looking back. "What does it say?" Daphne asked, very quietly, because loud felt wrong. Fleur was translating with her hands, tracing the shapes in the air the way her grandmother had taught her with the singing stones, reading configuration rather than language. Her face was extraordinarily focused and open at the same time, the mask fully down, and Harry thought he had not seen her look like this before, pure engagement, nothing held back. It says, she stopped. Tried again. The translation is not clean. The concept is, three who are one are more than three. The weight carried by one becomes the weight carried by the configuration. The threat meant for one becomes the threat faced by three. She paused. And then it says something she turned the configuration in her hands like an object. It says, what was planned for the one will unmake the planning. The convergence released. The symbols descended back into the floor. The walls dimmed to their ambient pulse. All three of them breathed. That last part, Harry said. Yes, Fleur said. What was planned for me at the end of this tournament, Harry said slowly, is going to fail because it was planned for one person and it's going to get three. That's one reading, Daphne said. She was looking at the floor where the symbols had been, and her expression had a quality he'd only seen twice before, genuine unguardedness, the armor fully lowered. The other reading is that the plan unmaking itself isn't a passive outcome. It's causal. We make it unmake itself by being the three. By showing up as the bond, Harry said. Yes. Then we need to be ready to do that, Harry said. Whatever happens at the third task, we go in as the configuration. Not improvised, prepared. We have time, Fleur said. The second task is February. The third is June. She was collecting herself, the composure rebuilding, but differently than it used to, not as armor but as shape, the way a river has banks not to trap it but to give it direction. February 1st. The second task preparation intensified in the final 3 days of the holidays. Neville Longbottom turned out to be the easiest part. Harry had approached him on the 8th morning with a question about gillyweed, framed as curiosity, and Neville had launched into a 12-minute detailed explanation of its properties, optimal growing conditions, duration variability, and sourcing options with the fluency of someone who had been waiting for permission to be an expert at something. He had 3 pounds of it dried in his dormitory, had been cultivating it in one of the greenhouse supplemental beds since October because Professor Sprout had mentioned the lake task in passing and Neville had simply prepared. I never know when something might be useful, Neville said, with an earnestness that Harry found genuinely moving. Neville, you're going to be an extraordinary wizard, Harry said. Neville looked at him with the expression of someone who had been told the opposite in various ways for most of his life and was processing a genuine contradiction. Oh, he said. Thank you. Harry pocketed the gillyweed and felt an uncomplicated warmth that had nothing to do with the bond and was simply about Neville Longbottom being exactly who he was. Daphne received her father's response on day 8, late afternoon. She found Harry in the corridor outside the Great Hall and looked at him with an expression that was controlled above a layer of something that wasn't. My father confirmed it, she said, quietly. The person presenting as Moody has been using Polyjuice Potion continuously since before term started. The real Moody is, my father's sources think he's alive but contained somewhere. A pause. The ministry has been alerted. Discreetly, through channels that will not immediately flag at Hogwarts. She held his gaze. He does not know who the impersonator is. But he suspects a connection to the Dark Lord's remaining loyalists. Harry was quiet for a moment. The ministry is moving, he said. Slowly. As it always does. She met his eyes. We will not see results before February 24th. No, Harry agreed. So we treat it as a known threat and operate accordingly. Her jaw was set. He is not our primary concern right now. The task is. Agreed. She nodded, and turned to leave, and Harry said, Daphne. She turned back. You told your father to look into this before you knew how important it would be, he said. On the first night. That mattered. It's going to matter more. She looked at him, and the layer of something beneath the control surfaced for a moment, not undone, not overwhelmed, but present. Real. I know, she said, simply. And went. Term resumed, and the cold January that followed had a different quality than the months that had come before it. The social ecosystem of Hogwarts reasserted itself, for houses, for years of accumulated alliance and enmity, the Daily Prophet's continuing campaign of manufactured doubt about Harry's account of events, the tournament pressure building as February approached. But Harry moved through it differently. Not with more armor, with more certainty, which was different. The bond was a constant low frequency underneath everything, and it calibrated his sense of what mattered and what didn't with a precision that 3 months ago he'd have called perspective and now understood was something more literal. He could feel when something was worth his attention and when it wasn't, and the number of things worth his attention had narrowed considerably while the depth of his attention to those things had increased. Fleur navigated the Hogwarts social dynamics with the particular quality of someone who had decided to stop performing and was discovering that not performing required more energy in some ways and less in others. She moved through the great hall and the corridors with the same presence she'd always had, but the performance quality was different, less constructed, more directed. She'd stopped being the Vila champion for the benefit of observers and started being Fleur Delacour for the benefit of herself, and the difference was noticeable if you knew what you were looking at. Most people didn't. Harry and Daphne knew. Daphne's social navigation was more complex, because the Slytherin house dynamic had opinions about her spending significant time in the proximity of Harry Potter that she was managing through a combination of strategic information control and the particular authority she had in her year group that came from being the kind of person who had always moved through social structures rather than being moved by them. Pansy Parkinson had made one comment. The comment had been met with a look from Daphne that ended the conversation immediately and permanently. What Draco Malfoy thought was irrelevant to her. She had told him so, in those words, in the second week of January, when he'd made a pointed remark in the corridor about her choice of company. He had looked at her with the particular shock of someone who had assumed a level of loyalty that turned out not to exist. Harry had been around the corner and felt the exchange through the bond as a spike of clean, cold precision, and had smiled at the wall. February 24th arrived with grey skies and the temperature of a grudge. The lake in the morning had a color that wasn't quite grey and wasn't quite green, something colder than either, and the stands the school had erected on the bank were already full an hour before the task was set to begin. Harry stood at the champion's starting point at the lake's edge, in his swimming gear with the gillyweed in his hand, watching the surface of the water. Cedric was to his left. Victor to his right. Fleur beyond Victor, wrapped in something bright against the cold, already running the specific mental preparation Harry recognized as her preconvergent state. He could feel it through the bond, kinetic and contained, drawn metal. He could feel Daphne on the bank. She was 15 feet behind the starting line, in the spectator area but at the front where her line of sight to the water was clear. She had a watch in her parchment and the specific quality of attention that was her depth, the structured lake stillness that saw everything. Harry looked over his shoulder at her. She met his gaze from the stands, and there was nothing casual in the look, it was precise and direct and said I have you in a way that was not about sentiment and not about the bond's romantic dimension, whatever that was, but was about the fundamental fact of another person holding the other end of a thread. He turned back to the water. He heard the signal. He put the gillyweed in his mouth. He went in. The cold hit him first, the shock of it, February lake water like a fist, and then the gillyweed kicked in with a speed that Neville had warned him about, the gills splitting along his neck with a sensation that was uncomfortable and then immediately natural, his hand spreading into something more useful for water, the murk of the lake becoming legible where it had been opaque. He dove. The convergence activated approximately 40 seconds into the descent, exactly as Fleur had predicted it would, and it was nothing like the voluntary practice. The voluntary practice had been like opening a door. The involuntary convergence was like the door coming open on its own and the wind through it being weather rather than air, present and directional and powerful and entirely indifferent to whether you'd planned for it. Harry felt Fleur enter the water somewhere to his right, not heard, felt, through the bond, her kinetic certainty moving through the cold dark with the efficiency of someone who had grown up by the sea. He felt her bubblehead charm maintaining, felt her moving with quick-stroke precision. He felt Daphne on the bank like a fixed point, steady and deep and holding the full picture, because from the bank she could see the time and the other champions and the surface of the water and the stands, and all of it was flowing back through the bond in the way data flows through a good circuit, clean and fast. 12 minutes in, he felt from her direction, wordlessly, more like a sense of time than a communication. Victor entered 3 minutes after you. Cedric is in. He dove deeper. The merpeople's city was a luminous wrongness in the dark water, buildings of stone and weed, lit by bioluminescent creatures, with a population that watched Harry pass with the particular expression of those who are fulfilling an obligation they find tedious. He navigated by the bond and his own knowledge of the lake's depth structure and arrived at the stone village center in 11 minutes, which was better than expected. 4 figures were tied to a stone pillar with thick, dark weed. Ron, Hermione, Cho Chang, and Gabrielle Delacour, 8 years old, with silver hair drifting in the cold water and an expression of peaceful unconsciousness that made Harry's chest do something sharp and certain. He went to Gabrielle first. Fleur wasn't here yet. Through the bond, he could feel her, close, but running behind, something had slowed her approach. He didn't know what and didn't need to know what. She wasn't here. Gabrielle was here. He used the gillyweed-enhanced grip on his hands to rip through the stoneweed restraint with a directness that surprised 2 nearby merpeople, who raised their spears and found him looking at them with an expression that had nothing afraid in it, and lowered their spears. He had Gabrielle free in 40 seconds. He held her under one arm, she was small and entirely unconscious and perfectly unharmed, and turned to Ron. Ron came free quickly. Harry supported him under the other arm and looked at the remaining 2 hostages. Hermione and Cho. Victor is close, came through the bond from Daphne on the bank, the fixed point, the holder of the full picture. 2 minutes behind you. Cedric is very close to Cho. He felt Fleur at the edge of the merpeople city. She arrived and saw Gabrielle already freed and Harry holding her, and the look on Fleur's face through the water and the murk was something Harry knew he'd remember. Not the polished version. Not the composed version. Just Fleur, completely, looking at her sister unconscious and safe and already being held by someone who had said I will and had meant it, and the expression was so far outside anything the composed Fleur mask could have contained that it simply didn't try. She took Gabrielle from him with both arms, pressed her face briefly to her sister's hair, and came back up to look at Harry with eyes that were wet in a way that wasn't just lake water. Go, he said, or made the shape of it, because sound didn't work. She went, powering upward with Gabrielle held against her, and Harry had Ron and was following, and above him the grey light of the surface was coming closer. He broke the surface with Ron under one arm and 6 minutes left on the hour, and felt Daphne's relief hit him through the bond like a physical thing, not composed, not structured, just a single clean wave of it, the shape of someone releasing a breath they'd been holding for 22 minutes. The lake cheered. The stands cheered. Harry got Ron to the bank, ignored the crowd, found Fleur standing with Gabrielle wrapped in a blanket and Madame Pomfrey fussing over both of them, and Fleur looked at him when he arrived and said nothing, which was the most honest response available. He nodded. She nodded back. It was enough. Daphne materialized at his elbow 3 minutes later, when the crowd was focused on Cedric arriving with Cho. She was composed and dry and had her parchment folded under her arm, and she looked at Harry with eyes that were clear and direct and said, the bond convergence held for the full task. 22 minutes. I know, Harry said. I felt it. Your gills were structurally more stable than the gillyweed standard duration would suggest, she said. I observed from the bank. I think the convergence was reinforcing the biological component. So the bond extended the gillyweed, Harry said. That's the hypothesis. She paused. Also, Gabrielle. I said I would. You did. She was looking at him with the deep quality, the lake stillness with the enormous depth under it, and something in her expression was doing what it always did in private, the armor lowering one careful degree. "Thank you," she said, and the word was uncomplicated and real and cost her nothing of herself, which Harry was beginning to understand was what happened when Daphne Greengrass stopped performing and simply was. "Don't thank me," Harry said. "Be ready for June." She held his gaze. "I have been ready for June since December 26th, she said, and turned to go manage the post-task debrief in the way of someone who has already thought about what needs managing next. Harry stood at the lake's edge and watched the grey water settle back into its ordinary surface and thought about what the marked stones had said, what was planned for the one will unmake the planning, and felt the bond do its steady work between the three of them, present and directional in theirs. The trap at the end of the tournament was still waiting. But its spring was going to find something different than it expected. He was sure of that now. He was, in fact, absolutely certain. Chapter 5, Fault Lines. 3 weeks after the second task, Dumbledore asked Harry to stay after the end-of-year feast planning meeting that nobody had actually asked Harry to attend. Harry had been sitting in the corridor outside the headmaster's office waiting for Daphne to finish using the library's restricted section access she'd charmed her way into, a story involving a forged note from Professor Snape that Harry was choosing not to examine too closely, when a second-year Hufflepuff had appeared and delivered the message with the slightly haunted expression of children who have been sent to find Harry Potter and aren't certain what they'll encounter. He'd gone up. He'd sat in the familiar chair across from the familiar desk. He'd looked at Fawkes, who had looked back with the particular quality of attention that made Harry wonder sometimes what phoenixes actually understood about human situations. Dumbledore had made tea. Then he'd sat down and looked at Harry over his spectacles with an expression that was kind and careful and doing work underneath the kindness that Harry was now practiced at reading. "How are you finding the spring term?" Dumbledore asked. "Fine," Harry said. "Better than the autumn." "The second task went well." "Very well, in fact, your score placed you equal with Mr. Diggory." A warm pause. "Though I understand you retrieved more than just your own hostage." "Miss Delacour ran late," Harry said. "Gabrielle was fine." "Of course." Dumbledore's eyes were doing the thing they did, the layered reading, the gentle probing that was so practiced it felt like warmth and was, Harry now understood, also extraction. "I wanted to speak with you about something I've been observing since the holidays." "Go ahead," Harry said. "I've noticed a change in you since December," Dumbledore said, setting down his cup and folding his hands. "In your magical presence, your confidence, your, social arrangements." He smiled. "You seem to have formed some significant friendships." "I have friends," Harry said. "Yes. With Miss Delacour and Miss Greengrass specifically." He said it without accusation, without alarm, with the measured warmth of someone who has chosen their opening very carefully. "I find that rather remarkable, given the house and school differences involved. And given the particular timing. December is a good time to meet people," Harry said. "Long evenings." Dumbledore regarded him for a moment. The warmth didn't shift, it never shifted, which was part of what made it complicated, but something in his eyes moved. A recalibration. He had, Harry realized, been expecting a different kind of response. Younger Harry would have deflected with less precision, or confirmed more than intended, or asked a question that opened the conversation rather than closing it. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and the shift in tone was a signal, moving from the approach he'd planned to something more direct. "I am aware of the ardentis vinculum." "I know," Harry said. Dumbledore paused. "You know that I know." "Since December 26th, Harry said. "You told me. In the third-floor sitting room. You used the name." "Ah." Something moved through Dumbledore's expression, a shade of something that was not quite embarrassment and not quite respect but existed between them. "So you do. I had wondered if you'd registered that." He looked at Harry steadily. "Then you also know that I've been waiting for you to bring it to me." "I've been managing it," Harry said. "We have. I see." The warmth was still there, but it was thinner now, or rather Harry could see through it more clearly. Harry, the vinculum is a significant and complex piece of old magic. It has implications for the path you've planned for me, Harry said. The room went quiet. Dumbledore looked at him, and for the first time in Harry's experience, the headmaster looked genuinely uncertain. Not of Harry's capability, that had never been in question for Dumbledore, who had always understood what Harry could do even while managing what he knew about it. Uncertain of the conversation. Of how much Harry had understood, and when, and what that meant for everything Dumbledore had built around it. That is a significant statement, Dumbledore said carefully. There's a path, Harry said. A necessary arc, something I have to do, have to walk toward, that you've known about for a long time, and that requires me to do it alone. He held the headmaster's gaze. You believe the vinculum complicates that? Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. You've grown considerably since September, he said, and it was genuine. There was no performance in it, just the honesty of someone who is seeing something they didn't expect to see. I have, Harry agreed. It turns out being bound to two extraordinary people and told something important is coming accelerates certain kinds of development. The vinculum itself accelerated it, Dumbledore said, and his voice had changed. The management layer was gone, replaced by something more real. The magical enhancement. The convergence. The widened awareness. He looked at Harry with eyes that were complicated and honest in a way they hadn't been at the start of the conversation. I was concerned about those effects, Harry. Not because they harm you, they manifestly do not. But because they may change the shape of what must happen. What must happen, Harry said. You mean Voldemort? Yes. You mean what comes after the tournament? What the tournament is building toward? He kept his voice even. You mean the plan that someone using Moody's face has been executing all year? Dumbledore went very still. You know about that? Since January. Ministry was alerted in February through Greengrass channels. He watched Dumbledore absorb this. They're moving slowly. Yes, Dumbledore said, and now there was something in his expression that Harry hadn't seen there before, something that wasn't certainty. I have been managing the Crouch situation carefully. There are reasons I haven't moved against him more aggressively that I cannot fully explain to you yet, because you want me to reach the end of the tournament, Harry said. Because I need to understand what Voldemort intends, Dumbledore said, with a directness that was itself a concession, an acknowledgement that Harry had earned the real answer. The tournament is a mechanism. Something is going to happen at the third task's conclusion. I believe I know what it is. But acting on my belief too early will drive it underground and I will lose the opportunity to prepare for it, Harry said. To prepare you for it, Dumbledore said, with a weight in the words that had the quality of a door opening onto something large. They looked at each other across the desk, and it was the most honest conversation Harry had ever had in this room, and he thought it was the most honest Dumbledore had been prepared to be, and both of those things were true because of what had changed since December. You should know, Harry said, that whatever's at the end of the tournament, I'm not walking into it alone. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The vinculum and my own decision, Harry said. They're both pointing the same direction. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Fawkes made a sound from his perch, that single syllable between inquiry and comfort. Dumbledore's expression did something complicated and landed somewhere that was not what Harry expected. Not resistance. Not managed redirection. Something that looked, after everything, like relief. Tell me what you've learned, Dumbledore said, quietly. Not what you'll tell me. What you actually know. And Harry, deciding in the moment that this was the right call, told him. Not everything. But enough. The fight happened on a Thursday. It started because of Pansy Parkinson, which Harry would later think was an appropriately absurd origin for something that cracked the fault lines he hadn't known were there. Pansy had been building toward it for weeks, the pointed looks in the corridor, the comments delivered at a volume calibrated for deniability, the particular social pressure that she applied to Daphne with the persistence of someone who believed that enough application would eventually move a wall. She'd been managing Daphne's divergence from Slytherin orthodoxy the way she managed most things, through attrition. On Thursday morning she made the mistake of doing it publicly, in the corridor outside Potions, with Harry present. It must be useful, Pansy said, to the space around Daphne rather than directly at her, in the way that allowed her to claim she wasn't being direct, to have found a way to access the boy who lived's tournament preparation. Very strategic. Very Slytherin, really. Harry said nothing. He was watching Daphne. Daphne also said nothing. She turned to look at Pansy with the specific quality of attention that she brought to things she was deciding to be thorough about, and Pansy, who had been expecting either a cold retort or silence, found herself being studied in a way that was considerably more uncomfortable than either. "You've been building toward this for a while," Daphne said, with the evenness of someone reading a document aloud. "The implication is that my association with Harry is strategic rather than genuine, which serves two purposes for you. It gives you a framework that fits your model of how relationships work, everything is transaction, nothing is real, and it lets you dismiss something you don't understand as something you do." She tilted her head slightly. "The problem with that analysis is that it assumes I operate the way you do. And you don't." Pansy said, with less assurance than she'd started with. "I used to," Daphne said, and it was so honest and so undefended that it stopped the entire corridor. "I came to the Yule Ball with a strategic proposal. It lasted approximately 40 minutes before something more important replaced it." She held Pansy's gaze with the clear, direct quality that Harry recognized as her actual face. "What replaced it is not something I'm going to explain to you because you don't have the framework for it yet." She went into Potions. Harry followed. Behind them, he heard Pansy say something sharp to Millicent, but it had the sound of someone losing a conversation rather than continuing it. In Potions, Harry sat at the bench next to Daphne, not their usual configuration. Snape noticed and said nothing, which itself said something, and said, very quietly, "You didn't have to defend it." "I know," she said, setting up her cauldron with precise, unhurried movements. "I wanted to." Something about the way she said it, the want, the unguarded admission of it, made Harry look at her for a moment longer than the situation required. She was looking at her ingredients with the focused attention she brought to everything, but there was something in her expression that was open in a new way, and the bond carried the shape of it to him, not the content, but the shape, and the shape was something that had been waiting to be acknowledged and was now, cautiously, testing what acknowledgement felt like. He looked away. He set up his own cauldron. The fault lines appeared that evening, because the bond's intensification after the second task had been building towards something and the first crack opened in the library at 7 o'clock. Fleur had been quieter than usual for 3 days. Harry had noticed through the bond, not distance, not coldness, but a quality of turning inward, of processing something private, of a door that had been open for months drawing toward closed. He'd let it be. The bond didn't require constant readout, it respected the closed room. But on Thursday evening, when Daphne made a dry comment about the parallel between a passage in Lolene Ardent and the Greengrass family philosophy of emotional management, and Harry laughed, genuinely, the uncomplicated laugh of someone who finds something funny without second-guessing it, Fleur looked at them both and the door came open. "I need to say something," she said. They both looked at her. She was sitting with the book closed on her knee and her hands folded on top of it, and she was looking at Harry with the underneath face and something complicated and raw running through the bond from her direction, and Harry had the sense of standing at the edge of something significant without knowing its shape. "I am leaving Hogwarts in June," she said. "When the tournament ends. I return to France." The room was quiet. "I knew that," Harry said. "I know you knew that." She held his gaze. "What I need to say is that I have not been honest with myself about what that means. For the bond. For," she stopped, and the compression was back, the door wanting to close, and she pushed it open by force of will. "For what has developed here. Daphne was very still beside Harry. "I am not good at this," Fleur said, and it came out with a kind of controlled frustration that was honesty as effort. "I am exceptional at many things and I am not good at this. At saying the real thing instead of the managed version." She looked at Harry, then at Daphne, then back. "I find that I care about both of you significantly more than I intended to and considerably more than is comfortable, and I don't know what to do about the fact that in 6 weeks we will no longer be in proximity and the bond will have to exist at a distance that it was not designed for." A silence with real weight in it. "The text didn't say anything about distance," Daphne said carefully. "The text didn't say anything about distance because the text was written by people who lived in the same place," Fleur said, with a sharpness that wasn't aimed at Daphne. "The people described in the vinculum were a community. They were not," she gestured, a frustrated motion that encompassed the whole situation. "They were not a French champion returning to Beauxbatons and a Slytherin staying in Britain and a boy who lived doing whatever comes next." "Fleur," Harry said. She looked at him. 6 weeks is not a resolution," he said. "It's a transition. The bond is permanent," the text said that clearly. "Distance doesn't break it." He held her gaze. "And whatever comes after June, I am not interested in treating what has happened here as something that ends because a school year ends." "You don't know what comes after June," she said. "No," he said. "I know what's at the end of the 3rd task, and I know it's going to be bad, and I know we're going into it as the configuration, and everything after that is a conversation we haven't had yet." He paused. "I'd like to have it." Fleur looked at him for a long moment with something that was naked and real and made no attempt to be anything else. "You are very," she stopped. "Stubborn," Daphne said, from Harry's other side. "We," Fleur said, and something in her face cracked open in the most beautiful way, not broken, opened, a door not forced but unlocked from inside, and she laughed, and it was the real laugh, full and unguarded, the one the bond had told Harry existed long before he'd actually heard it. Daphne was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the care of someone choosing precisely, "I would also like to have that conversation." The fault line didn't close. But the ground on both sides of it was visible now, and visible was better. They were still in the library at 8:30 when the door at the far end opened and Bartemius Crouch Jr., wearing Alastair Moody's face and moving with the specific directional energy of someone who has made a decision, walked in. Harry felt him before the door finished opening, the wrong signature, the seam between surface and depth, and was on his feet before his chair had finished moving. Daphne had the same response time. She was standing 2 seconds after Harry, her wand in her hand with the smooth economy of someone who had been drilling wand draw since December. Fleur was half a second behind both of them, which was the only time Harry had seen her be second to anything physical, and it told him how absorbed she'd been in the conversation they'd just had. Fake Moody stopped inside the door and looked at all 3 of them with his one good eye, the magical eye sweeping the room, through walls, establishing the geometry of the situation. His expression, in Moody's scarred face, was something between cold assessment and something more complicated. "Potter," he said. "I need a word." "You can have it in front of them," Harry said. "That's not, it is, actually," Harry said. "They stay." Fake Moody looked at him with the magical eye doing its sweep again, and Harry could see the calculation happening, the plan meeting a variable it hadn't accounted for, the assessment of how to proceed. He'd come here for something specific. A private conversation, probably. Final task preparation, something that would get Harry moving in the direction the plan required without being obvious. He had not expected Harry to have people. "You've been busy since December," Fake Moody said, and the voice had taken on a quality that was different from the bluff, paranoidora persona he wore, something underneath it, more precise, more cold. "Working hard," Harry said. "You know how it is. The 3 of you." Fake Moody's magical eye moved between them. "Together, consistently, since the ball." A pause that had something calculating in it. "The old magic in the castle. Ancient history is interesting," Harry said. "Don't," said Fake Moody, and the bluff persona dropped another degree. I know what you found. I know what it is. And I'm telling you, Potter, whatever you think that bond is going to do for you in June, you should reconsider. Why? Harry asked, with the genuine curiosity of someone who isn't afraid of the answer. Because what's coming in June was planned very carefully, Fake Moody said. For one person. One champion arriving at one specific point. The plan has contingencies. His voice had the particular quality of someone delivering a threat that is also a sincere warning, because the two things weren't mutually exclusive. A bond complicates contingencies. Good, Harry said. Fake Moody looked at him with something that was, under everything, almost like assessment, the look of someone who has just recalibrated their model of a target and found the target more interesting than expected. You're not afraid, he said. No, Harry said. You should be. Maybe, Harry said. But I'm not, so we're working with what we have. The magical I did it sweep one more time, Harry, Fleur, Daphne, the triangle of them, the bond's configuration that would be visible to anyone with the sensitivity to read ambient magic. Something passed through Fake Moody's expression that Harry couldn't fully read. It was complex, layered, the expression of someone who is simultaneously executing a plan and genuinely uncertain about one of its variables. The third task, Fake Moody said. June 24th. I know when it is, Harry said. A pause. Then Fake Moody turned and left, and the door closed behind him, and the library was very quiet. Harry turned to look at Daphne and Fleur. Daphne had her wand still out, and she was looking at the door with an expression that was doing rapid work. He came here to intimidate you, she said. To destabilize your confidence before the third task. That's not all he came for, Fleur said. She had her wand out too, and her jaw was set, and the kinetic energy was running high through the bond, drawn metal under serious tension. He came because he wanted to see it. The configuration. He wanted to assess whether we were actually what the bond's signature indicated, or whether the signature was residual. She looked at Harry. He confirmed to himself that we are real. And he reported it, Harry said. He'll report it to Voldemort. The name sat in the room without drama. Daphne absorbed it with a stillness that wasn't shock. She'd known the name, had known the stakes, had chosen them. Fleur absorbed it with the quality of someone who had been walking toward a door for months and had just seen it from close range. He reports to Voldemort, Daphne said, that the plan is complicating. That there is a configuration around Harry that wasn't factored in. And Voldemort adjusts, Harry said. Or overestimates his own adjustments, Fleur said, with the cold precision of someone who has thought about powerful people who believe their plans are sufficient. Powerful people who have planned for a long time tend to believe that adjustments can accommodate any variable. They are often wrong. The stone said as much, Daphne said. What was planned for the one will unmake the planning. We need to accelerate the convergence training, Harry said. Before June. We need to be able to hold it for the duration of whatever the third task is, not 20 minutes. Hours, potentially. Hours is possible, Fleur said, with the certainty of someone who has been pushing her component of the convergence state in private practice. I've been extending the preparation state. I can sustain pre-convergence for 4 hours without degradation now. Harry looked at her. 4 hours. I told you I was working on it, she said, with a quality that was half professional pride and half something warmer. Daphne? Harry asked. 3 hours, Daphne said, with the specific tone of someone who considers 3 hours acceptable progress on a 6-week timeline and is already calculating the path to 4. I've been using the deep state structure, building it in layers rather than holding it whole. It's more stable that way. Good, Harry said. That's very good. He sat back down, because his legs had decided they were done with the standing portion of the evening, and Fleur and Daphne sat too, and the three of them were quiet for a moment with the weight of June 24th settling over them like weather. Then Daphne said, in her even, practical voice, there's also the matter of Dumbledore. I told him more than I planned to, Harry said. Last week. He asked for the real account and I gave him most of it. How much is most? Fleur asked. The bond, the vinculum, the convergence, the moody situation. He paused. Not the stone room. Not the configuration's full properties. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Was that the right call? I think so, Harry said. He's not the enemy. He's just been working from a plan that was designed for someone alone, and the bond is forcing him to revise it. He'll get there. He looked at both of them. He looked relieved, actually. When I told him we'd be going in together. Relieved, Daphne said. Like someone who'd been carrying a weight alone and found out they don't have to anymore, Harry said. Just relieved. Daphne looked at the table for a moment, and Harry recognized the expression. She was filing the information about Dumbledore being relieved under something personal and parallel, because it was the same expression she'd had when he'd said this is a joint decision in the library alcove in December. He didn't say anything about it. He let it sit where it sat. Right, Fleur said, standing, because Fleur's version of processing difficult emotions was kinetic activity and she'd been sitting still for long enough. The convergence. Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, Harry said. And tonight, Daphne said, gathering her things with the deliberate care of someone who is doing something slow because they want to, I'm going to finish translating the final chapter of Lolene Ardent. She looked at Harry and then at Fleur. The one we skipped because we thought we had time. What's in it? Harry asked. I don't know yet, she said. That's why I'm translating it. She stood, and paused, and looked at both of them with an expression that had lowered several layers and was simply looking, openly, at two people she was going to walk into something significant with, and deciding to let that be seen. Whatever it is, I'll find you both in the morning. She left, and her footsteps were even and measured and the bond carried her deep state quality with her, structured, layered, strong in the specific way of things built to last. Fleur was by the window, looking at the evening grounds with the lake dark below and the forest at its dark edge and the sky going from violet to black above it. Harry stood next to her, close enough to be present, not close enough to impose, and looked at the same view. Are you all right? He asked. I am better than all right, she said, after a moment. I am also frightened, which I find I can admit to you in a way I cannot admit to most people. She turned to look at him. Is that the bond? Partly, he said. Partly just you. She looked at him for a moment, the underneath face fully present, something in her eyes that had been moving towards something for months and was now arriving, unhurried and certain. When the tournament ends, she said. When it ends, he agreed. She nodded, once, with the quality of someone who has made a decision about something important and is at peace with it, and turned back to the window, and they stood there in the quiet for a while longer before the evening properly took hold and they went their separate ways. Harry walked back to Gryffindor Tower through corridors that were full of the castle's old breathing and the bond's quiet constancy, and thought about June 24th the way you think about weather you know is coming, not with dread, not with suppressed dread, but with the clear-eyed assessment of someone who has done the preparation and knows the difference between dangerous and impossible. Voldemort had planned for one boy in a graveyard. He was going to get the configuration. He was going to get 3 people who had spent 6 months learning each other's depths, running toward difficulty rather than away from it, practicing the specific art of becoming something more than themselves while remaining entirely themselves, and who had been told by very old stone in very old language that the plan built around one would be unmade by 3. Harry climbed through the portrait hole and found Ron asleep on the common room sofa with a chess piece in his hand, and felt a specific warmth for his best friend that was uncomplicated and good, and covered him with a blanket, and went upstairs. He lay in the dark and felt the bond and thought about the final chapter of Lolene Ardent and what Daphne would find when she translated it. He found out at 6 in the morning when he woke to feel her quality coming through the bond at an intensity that was not alarm but was extremely close to it, the shape of someone who has read something significant and is sitting with it and needs to be found. He got dressed fast. He found her in the room of requirement, which had opened without the 3-pass walk, just the door, present, when he arrived at the corridor. Daphne was sitting on the floor by the marked stones with Lolene ardent open on her knee and her hair slightly disordered, which for Daphne was the equivalent of visible distress. She looked up when he came in. Her eyes were clear and direct and awake in the way of someone who hasn't slept. "The final chapter," he said. "Yes." She looked at the book. "It describes the convergent state at full activation. Not the voluntary practice state. Not the involuntary second task convergence. The full activation, what the bond is capable of at its apex. What does it do?" She met his eyes. "It describes something the text calls le cœur de feu antique, the heart of ancient fire. The wild magic, the preclassification power." She paused. "Harry, the text says that at full activation, in the presence of an active existential threat to the configuration, the ardentis vinculum does not simply enhance the individuals within it." "What does it do?" he asked again, with the steady certainty of someone who is ready for the answer. Daphne looked at him, and the expression on her face was the most open he'd ever seen it, no armor, no structure, just Daphne, looking at him with the enormous depth of her and something that was awe and something that was fear and something that was the particular quality of a person who has found a truth they were not expecting and is deciding to stand in it anyway. "It makes the three into something old magic recognizes as a single extraordinary force," she said. "Not three people combined. Something genuinely new." And the text says, she looked at the page and read, translating carefully. "Against this, the darkness that moves against one brings itself against all, and against all that has been, all that is, and all that the ancient fire remembers." The room of requirement was quiet. The marked stones glowed softly, just at the edge of visibility, as though the castle had been listening. Harry sat down on the floor beside Daphne and looked at the book with her, and when Fleur arrived 7 minutes later, the bond pulling her in without a message needed, she sat on Daphne's other side, and the three of them sat with the old words and the warm stones and June 24th sitting at the end of everything like a door none of them had chosen and all three of them were going to walk through. The ancient fire remembered. Whatever was waiting in the graveyard was about to find out what that meant. Chapter 6, The Binding We Choose. June 24th arrived the way serious things do, without announcement, as though it had simply always been there waiting and the calendar had finally caught up to it. The morning was warm and clear, the Scottish summer doing something generous with the light, spreading it wide and gold across the grounds in a way that made everything look like a painting of itself. Harry ate breakfast in the great hall with Ron on one side and Hermione on the other, and felt the bond running its steady current underneath the normalcy of scrambled eggs and pumpkin juice and Ron talking about whether the third task maze would have blast-ended scripts in it. "They'd be cruel to put them in," Ron said, with the resigned certainty of someone who believes cruelty is the organizing principle of the tournament. "They put dragons in the first task," Hermione said. "Right. They're definitely in there," Ron said. Harry ate his eggs and felt Fleur 2 tables over having coffee with the focused, deliberate quality of someone running through a mental preparation sequence, and felt Daphne at the Slytherin table doing something similar with the structural layering method she developed, building the preconvergent state in careful increments, like tuning an instrument before a performance. He felt both of them the way he'd learned to feel them over 6 months, which was clearly and without confusion, the way you know the voices of people you've been talking to for a long time. He was not afraid. He had checked for the fear repeatedly over the past week, the way you probe a sore tooth with your tongue, expecting to find it, finding instead a kind of clean, settled certainty that was better than courage because it didn't require effort. He'd identified the absence of fear correctly. It wasn't numbness, wasn't suppression, wasn't the particular bravado of someone who hasn't thought about consequences. It was the specific quality of someone who has done the preparation, trusts the people standing with him, and is ready to find out what happens. Dumbledore had spoken to him again 2 days ago. A different conversation than before, shorter, more direct, with the changed quality of a relationship that had been renegotiated. "There will be a portkey inside the maze," Dumbledore had said. "I believe the Triwizard Cup itself has been enchanted. It will take whoever touches it to a specific location." He'd looked at Harry over his half-moon spectacles with the honest eyes, the ones without the management layer. "I believe it will be a graveyard. I believe Tom Riddle is there, or will be. I know, Harry had said. You know, Dumbledore said. I've been dreaming about it since September. A graveyard. A dark figure. A ritual. He'd held the headmaster's gaze. I know what the ritual is for. Dumbledore had been quiet for a moment. The vinculum, he'd said carefully. In the convergent state. You understand the implications. Yes. Harry. A pause with real weight. What I have been building toward, the understanding I have been developing about what must eventually happen, the vinculum changes the shape of it. Perhaps significantly. He'd looked at Harry with the expression he'd worn when he looked relieved, but deeper now, more honest. I want you to know that I believe the change is, not wrong. That the castle's judgment and my own are not as far apart as you may have assumed. I didn't assume they were enemies, Harry had said. I just assumed yours came with more management. Something that was genuinely, unguardedly funny had crossed Dumbledore's face. Yes, he'd said. It does. I am working on that. Now Harry ate his last piece of toast on June 24th and thought about graveyard timing, convergence duration, and whether blast-ended scripts were actually in the maze. You're very calm, Hermione said, looking at him with the specific attention she brought to things that worried her. I'm ready, he said. She looked at him for a moment. She had noticed, over the past 6 months, the changes in him, not all of them, not the bond specifically, but the general shape of what had changed. She was Hermione, so she had noticed accurately and said less than she'd thought, which was its own kind of gift. Harry, she said. Whatever happens in there, it's going to be fine, he said, and he meant it. Not fine in the sense of easy. But fine in the sense of, we'll be okay. We, she said, with a specific quality of emphasis. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the clear eyes of someone who has put a picture together from available evidence and is not going to say so because she is also wise enough to know when not to say things. Trust me, he said. I always trust you, she said, which was both true and an extraordinary thing to say to someone who had spent 4 years making trust frequently difficult. I just worry. I know, he said. You're allowed. Ron was looking between them with the expression of someone who suspects he's missing context but has decided the toast is more important. Harry appreciated Ron's relationship with missing context. It was one of his better qualities. The maze had been growing in the Quidditch pitch since May, hedges enchanted to 50 feet, dense and dark, with the occasional sound from within that confirmed Ron's blast-ended script theory. The champions assembled at the entrance in the early evening, when the light had gone golden and horizontal and the shadows were long, and the stands were full and the atmosphere had the particular quality of something significant enough that people had mostly stopped talking. Fleur stood 2 people to Harry's left, in her Beauxbatons athletic robes, with her hair braided back in the practical style she'd been wearing since December. She looked composed and ready in herself, not performing readiness, actually ready, which was a distinction the past 6 months had made legible to Harry in ways it hadn't been before. He met her eyes. She nodded once, and the bond carried what the nod meant in full, I'm here, pre-convergence is running, I'm ready when you are. He looked into the stands. Found Daphne in the 3rd row with the immediate ease of the bond's orientation, sitting with Tracy Davis and looking at him with the clear, direct gaze that was her actual face. She had her watch on her wrist and her hands folded in her lap, and the bond carried her quality clearly, deep, structured, layered, the pre-convergent state built to its full 4-hour capacity and holding steady. She touched her wrist once. The watch. He understood. She was timing. She was holding the picture. She was the fixed point. He turned back to the maze entrance and felt the configuration settle into its full shape around him, the triangle, the 3 points, the lines connecting them carrying the bond's current, and felt for the first time since September the complete absence of isolation. Dumbledore was speaking. The task rules. The scoring. The nature of the maze, its enchantments, the fact that champions could send up red sparks to be extracted if in serious danger. Harry listened with the surface part of his attention and spent the deeper part on the final pre-convergence preparation, running through the practice sequence he'd developed over 6 months until it was so integrated he barely had to think about it. Cedric beside him was doing his own preparation, in his own way, and Harry felt genuine warmth for him. Cedric Diggory, who had been decent at every juncture when he didn't have to be, who had given a hint about the egg, who had navigated the complicated social geometry of being the Hogwarts champion when Harry was also in the tournament with more grace than most people would manage. He deserved to finish this tournament standing. He needed to finish it standing. Harry filed that under the category of things he would not let go wrong tonight. The whistle blew. He went in. The maze closed around him with the specific quality of an environment that was actively managed, not static, not random, but responsive. He felt it assessing him the way he felt the wrong signature in fake Moody's presence, the sense of intention behind the surface. The hedges moved. He could hear them shifting further in, a deep grinding of dense magical vegetation rearranging its geometry. He moved fast. Not running. Running burned energy and created noise and reduced perception, but fast, with the economy of someone who has thought about how to move through a constrained environment. He oriented himself by the bond and by the stars visible in the narrow strip of sky above the hedge tops. The bond gave him Fleur's direction, elsewhere in the maze, moving parallel, her kinetic quality running steady and controlled. He adjusted his path to ensure they weren't converging unnecessarily yet. She was fine. She was Fleur. The bond gave him Daphne, fixed and deep on the bank outside, the external eye, the holder of the full picture. He felt her awareness running across the top of the bond like a hand across a surface, methodical and thorough. He took a right fork at the first junction based purely on the bond's directional sense, the feeling that right was more open, more toward the center, though he couldn't have articulated why, and the reasoning proved correct when he found the left fork's alternative blocked 30 seconds later by the sound of something heavy and spiny moving in that direction. Blast ended scrut. Ron had been right. He moved deeper. The first real problem was a boggart, which appeared in the path 20 minutes in as the Dementor form it always chose for him, gliding with its rotting darkness above the maze floor. Harry hit it with a nonverbal ridiculous before it had finished manifesting, thought of serious, sharp and specific, a genuine image of his godfather laughing at something stupid, which worked better than anything artificially constructed, and the Dementor became a deflating balloon that spun in 3 circles and vanished. The second problem was Victor Crumb. Victor was coming from the left junction, moving with athletic efficiency, and under normal circumstances this would have been a simple acknowledgement between competitors. But Victor's eyes were wrong. They had the particular glassy quality of the Imperious Curse, and his wand was already up. Harry moved first, ducking under the cruciatus that Victor fired with the reflexive speed of someone who had been drilling responses to unexpected attacks for months, rolling to his left, and coming up with the impediment jinx that stopped Victor mid-stride. He followed it with the shield charm that bought him 2 seconds, and used the 2 seconds to hit Victor with the most effective counter-curse he knew for the Imperious, a combination Dumbledore had taught him in their private sessions that used intent as much as incantation, a targeted mental clarity hex that worked on the victim's ability to process external commands. Victor blinked. Then blinked again, and the glassy quality cracked and fell away like a mask, and he looked at Harry with the sharp, present eyes that were his actual eyes. "Potter," he said, with the hoarse quality of someone coming back from somewhere cold. "Someone hit you with the Imperious in the maze," Harry said. "Can you stand?" "Duh," Victor said, and stood, and the word had the weight of someone reassembling themselves in real time. "Thank you." He looked around the maze path with the sharp assessment of someone re-entering a situation. "Who? Someone inside," Harry said. "We can figure out who later. Right now, go toward the center carefully. Don't trust anyone you meet until you've verified they're not under." Victor looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone reassessing a model. Then he nodded, with the economy of a person for whom a nod is a complete communication, and moved toward the center path. Harry felt the bond spike from Daphne's direction, not words, not quite, but the shape of urgent information. He focused on it. "Cedric, came through the bond's ambient channel, not communication but understanding, the convergence making Daphne's observational intelligence accessible in the way the text had described. Cedric is near the center. He's moving toward the cup. He moved faster. The maze's center opened up into a circular clearing larger than the paths, the hedges pulling back to create a space maybe 40 feet across, with the Triwizard cup sitting on a stone plinth in the exact center, glowing with a blue-white light that was the specific light of enchanted objects under active spellwork. The cup was wrong. He could feel it from 20 feet away, not the tournament's mechanical contractual magic, but something else underneath it, something that had been placed there by a different hand for a different purpose. A portkey. Cedric was at the plinth's base, reaching for the cup, with the expression of someone who has arrived first and has worked extraordinarily hard for a year and is taking the moment he's earned. "Cedric," Harry said. Cedric looked up. "Don't touch it yet," Harry said, moving toward him. Cedric's hand had stopped a foot from the cup and he was looking at Harry with an expression that was, to his enormous credit, more curious than competitive. "Potter?" "What? The cup is a portkey," Harry said, arriving at the plinth. "It goes somewhere specific, and someone is waiting there, and it's not a trophy ceremony." Cedric looked at the cup. Then at Harry. Then back at the cup, and his face went through a sequence of emotions that resolved, impressively quickly, into a clear-eyed assessment. "You're sure?" "Yes." "How sure?" "I've been dreaming about the place it takes you since September," Harry said. "A graveyard. A ritual. Someone who wants me there." He met Cedric's eyes. "It's a trap. It was designed for me specifically." Cedric looked at the cup for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry. "What do we do?" Before Harry could answer, Fleur came through the hedge on the clearing's far side. She'd burned through it, a clean controlled fire that was her grandmother's magic rather than anything on a curriculum, and arrived in the clearing with the economy of someone who had been moving fast and had arrived where she intended to. She looked at the cup. She looked at Harry and Cedric. Her jaw set. "I felt it from 2 paths over," she said. "The portkey enchantment. I know what this is." "We all know what it is," Harry said. Cedric looked at Fleur, then at Harry. "The two of you have been," he started, then stopped, and his expression did the recalibration that Harry had become practiced at observing. "The Yule Ball," Cedric said. "The change since December. You've been preparing." "Yes," Harry said. "For this." "For what comes after this," Harry said. "Cedric, you can go. Touch the cup and it takes you to the graveyard. I don't recommend it. Send up red sparks, Dumbledore will extract you and you'll be safe. Or," Cedric said, because he was Cedric Diggory and apparently could not be fobbed off with a non-choice. "Or stay here. Don't touch the cup. Wait." Harry looked at him steadily. "Whatever happens when I touch it, Dumbledore is watching and will respond. But it needs to happen, Dumbledore needs it to happen, to see what Voldemort is planning. We go, we deal with it, we come back." He paused. "Fleur doesn't have to come." "Fleur, do not finish that sentence," Fleur said, in a voice that ended the sentence permanently. Harry looked at her. "Right," he said. Cedric looked between them for a moment. Then he reached into his robes and touched his wand. "I'm sending up the sparks," he said. "And then I'm staying in this clearing, and if you're not back in 30 minutes I'll tell Dumbledore everything you just told me." He met Harry's eyes with the clear, direct quality of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it. "Come back." "We'll come back," Harry said. He looked at Fleur. She looked at him. The bond was running at its full preconvergence capacity, kinetic and structured, her component and his, and Daphne's deep state quality transmitting through the external link as steadily as it had been for an hour. He could feel Daphne in the stands outside the maze, watching the sky above it, feeling what was coming through the bond with the specific quality of someone who is the fixed point and knows it and has made peace with the weight of being the thread holder. He sent a single pulse through the bond toward her, not words, just presence. "I know you're there." The response came back immediately, clean and certain. "I have you. Go." He and Fleur reached for the cup at the same moment. The world lurched. The graveyard arrived all at once, cold, dark, the particular smell of old stone and damp earth, with yew trees at the edges and a dark manor house on a hill beyond the stone wall. The little Hangleton graveyard, though Harry didn't know the name until later. What he knew immediately was that it was exactly as he'd seen it in the dreams, which meant the dreams had been accurate, which meant what came next was also accurate. A figure in dark robes moved from behind the nearest headstone. Peter Pettigrew. Wormtail. Carrying something bundled in cloth, something that gave off the specific wrong quality of a magical signature that was alive but shouldn't be, that was power compressed into a form too small, that was waiting to become something larger. Harry and Fleur had landed on their feet, which was not standard Portkey behavior and was the first indication that 6 months of convergence practice had changed how they interfaced with forcible magical transport. They were upright, wands out, facing Pettigrew before he'd reached the stone cauldron in the graveyard center. Pettigrew stopped. He looked at Harry. He looked at Fleur. His face went through several colors. "There were supposed to be," he started. "One of me," Harry said. "Yeah. Bad planning." The convergence activated. Not gradually, not with the slow build of the practice sessions. It came in full, the way the text said it would in active danger, the bond going from pre-convergence to full activation in the space of a breath, the 3 points aligning with the totality of everything they'd practiced over 6 months. Harry felt Fleur lock in beside him, her kinetic certainty, her grandmother's old magic, her 3 months of extended hold practice running clean and full. He felt Daphne through the external link, the fixed point holding the thread from 500 miles away, the deep state structure she'd built transmitting through the bond with perfect stability. And the third thing the convergence produced, the thing beyond the sum of the parts, came alive in his sternum like a coal being breathed into fire. Le cœur de feu antique. The ancient fire. It was not light magic. It was not dark magic. It was something older than those categories, something that predated the frameworks people had built around power, and it ran through him with the quality of something that had been waiting for exactly this moment and exactly this configuration, something the old stone at Hogwarts had recognized in 3 people at a school dance 6 months ago and had been patient about. Peter Pettigrew dropped the bundled thing and ran 3 steps toward the cauldron, and Harry said, "No," not loudly, not angrily, simply, and raised his wand, and the spell that came out of it was not a standard impediment jinx. It was something the ancient fire shaped, something with the quality of a root system, binding without breaking, holding without trapping, and Pettigrew stopped as though the ground had decided to keep him. He stopped and could not move and looked at Harry with an expression that was terror and something older than terror underneath it, something that recognized what was in front of him and understood that it was not what had been planned for. The bundled thing moved in the cloth. "Deal with Pettigrew," Harry said to Fleur, and she moved without hesitation because the convergence meant she'd already known that was coming, and Harry moved toward the bundled thing with the ancient fire running full and clear through the bond and through him. The bundled cloth fell away. What was inside it was what Harry had seen in his dreams, something that was barely alive and enormously wrong, a protoform with red eyes and a hate in it that was so old and so dense it had its own gravitational field, drawing things into its orbit and consuming them. It looked at Harry with those eyes and opened its mouth, and the sound that came out of it was not words, not quite, but was the shape of a command, the expectation of obedience, the absolute certainty of a thing that had been powerful for so long it had forgotten what resistance felt like. Harry looked back at it with the ancient fire running through him and felt no fear and no hate, neither of those things, which surprised him, but something clear and huge and old, and said, "No," again, in the same way, simply. The protoform launched something, not a spell in the standard sense, a projection of raw dark power, the kind that had killed his parents in a house in Godric's Hollow and left a scar on his forehead and set the whole story in motion. It came fast and without warning and with the certainty of something that had worked every time before. The ancient fire met it. The collision was silent. That was the thing Harry remembered afterward, how silent it was. The dreams had given him fire and noise and a green light like falling. The actual moment was quiet. The dark power and the ancient fire met in the graveyard center, and the ancient fire didn't fight it, it simply was more than it. Not stronger in the directional sense, not a force overpowering another force, but the way a flood is more than a cup of water. Old beyond old, pre-classification, the magic that predated the distinction between light and dark and therefore couldn't be beaten by either category's tools. The protoform screamed. It was the sound of something that has always gotten what it wanted, discovering, for the first time, that it cannot have this. Harry felt Fleur through the convergence, her component holding steady, her focus clean, the old ancestral magic of her grandmother's line running alongside the ancient fire and harmonizing with it. He felt Daphne through the external link, the deep state structure transmitting without loss, the fixed point holding the thread, and through it Daphne's specific quality of enormous depth that was, he understood now with full clarity, as much a part of the configuration's power as anything he or Fleur brought to it. Three who are one are more than three. The marked stones had been right. Pettigrew was on the ground, Fleur's binding holding, and was making a sound that was partly fear and partly something Harry recognized as the particular grief of someone who has been wrong for a very long time and is just now understanding the full cost of it. The protoform of Voldemort was still. Not defeated, not yet, that was not this night's work, but contained, the way you contain something that has been given no room to grow. The ancient fire had not destroyed it. It had looked at it clearly and found it smaller than advertised, and held it in that finding, and the thing with red eyes looked back at Harry from the cloth on the graveyard ground with an expression that nobody but Harry ever saw and that Harry spent a long time afterward not quite knowing how to describe. It had expected to be feared. It had expected Harry alone. It had gotten neither thing. The sound of apparition cracked through the graveyard, multiple arrivals, rapid, with the purposeful quality of people responding to a signal. Dumbledore came through the graveyard gate with the energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment and was moving now with the total commitment of someone who had been managing for a very long time and was done managing. He looked at the scene, Harry standing, Fleur beside him, Pettigrew bound, the protoform contained, and his expression was one Harry had never seen on Albus Dumbledore before. It was the relief again, but enormous now, the relief of something releasing that had been held for 13 years, and underneath it something that was just feeling, raw and old and nothing like management. Harry, he said. Dumbledore, Harry said. They looked at each other across the graveyard, and the look carried everything that had passed between them since December and a great deal that had passed before December that neither of them had said cleanly, and then Dumbledore nodded once with the completeness of someone who has, finally, received the picture in full, and turned to the business of the graveyard with the competence of someone who was extraordinary at this specific work. Aurors arrived 2 minutes later. The ministry people who had been slowly processing the Moody situation turned out to have been less slow than advertised. Daphne's father's information had moved through channels that Dumbledore had, in the past week, helped accelerate. What had seemed like institutional slowness had been, in the final days, preparation for exactly this moment. The Triwizard Cup was broken open on the graveyard grass by a ministry cursebreaker and its portkey enchantment dismantled in approximately 40 seconds. Pettigrew was in ministry custody in 2 minutes. The protoform of Voldemort was, complicated. The containment held under Dumbledore's attention with a stability that suggested the ancient fire's work had been thorough. What came next was a longer conversation about magical theory and the specific difficulty of destroying something that had distributed its soul across multiple objects, and that conversation was not for a graveyard in June at midnight, but it began here, with the containment holding. Harry sat down on a gravestone, the one nearest him, which turned out to belong to someone named Thomas Riddle, which he discovered later and found symmetrical in a way that was either meaningful or not, and breathed. Fleur sat on the one beside him with the unself-conscious quality she'd developed over 6 months of private alcoves and practice rooms, and her composure was intact, but it was the shape composure, the banks of a river version, not the armor. She was breathing slowly and deliberately, and the kinetic quality was settling from its combat pitch to something lower and more sustainable. "Well," she said, after a moment. "Yeah," Harry said. The ancient fire. Yeah. She looked at him. You felt it. It felt like, he searched for it. It felt like the size I actually am. Not bigger than that. Just, that. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That is it exactly. Dumbledore came over while the Aurors processed the scene, and stood in front of Harry with his hands behind his back and the honest eyes, the ones without management, and said, the configuration worked. Yes, Harry said. The vinculum at full convergence. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him, and at Fleur, and then at the bond's external link running towards Scotland with the specific attention of someone who can read ambient magic and knows what he's reading. Miss Greengrass, he said, to the empty air, which wasn't empty. Through the bond, Harry felt Daphne's quality shift, a small acknowledgement, the deep state registering being seen. She held the thread, Harry said. She held the thread, Dumbledore agreed, and there was something in his voice that was genuine respect and something else that was a much older and more complicated feeling, the feeling of someone who has been alone in their understanding for a very long time, recognizing that they are no longer alone in it. I believe I owe a significant debt to the castle's judgment. We'll discuss it, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. We will. And went back to the Aurors. The return port key was a standard ministry issue, checked and cleared, and brought Harry and Fleur back to the Hogwarts grounds at 12:47 in the morning, arriving in the Quidditch pitch in a burst of ministry blue light that Cedric Diggory, who had been sitting on the plinth next to the now inert cup and had apparently not moved an inch in over an hour, saw immediately and was on his feet for in the time it took to blink. You're back, Cedric said, and the relief in it was uncomplicated and immediate. We said we would be, Harry said. Cedric looked at him with the clear-eyed assessment he'd had all year. Are you all right? Yes. What happened out there? That, Harry said, is a very long story. Cedric looked at Fleur, who was standing beside Harry with the quiet certainty of someone who has been through something significant and come out themselves on the other side. He looked back at Harry. Then he nodded, with the same economy as Victor's nod in the maze, a complete communication. Later, then. Later, Harry agreed. Daphne found them on the Quidditch pitch grounds, coming from the direction of the stands at the kind of pace that was not running and was also not walking and was the specific gait of someone who has been holding something with enormous controlled effort for 2 hours and has arrived at the place where they can set it down. She stopped 2 feet away and looked at Harry with the clear, direct gaze that was her actual face, and the deep state quality was winding down around the edges of her expression, the structure releasing its tension with the careful sequence of someone for whom releasing tension is as deliberate as building it. Harry looked back at her. The containment held, she said. Because she was Daphne and she needed the information confirmed. It held, he said. The ancient fire. Yes. She absorbed this. Then something happened in her expression that was the most unguarded thing he'd ever seen from her, not the 1-degree lowering, not the almost smile, but the full and complete version of whatever she kept behind the armor, and it was enormous and simple and entirely Daphne, and it stayed there for 3 full seconds before she brought the structure back up in the riverbank way, not as armor but as shape. Good, she said, and it carried the weight of 6 months. Fleur had moved to stand beside Daphne, and the 3 of them stood in the Quidditch pitch at nearly 1 in the morning with the night sky overhead doing nothing useful and the bond between them running in its full settled depth, the convergent state unwinding from its active configuration back into the ambient mode, but different now, changed by what it had done, like a muscle after significant use that knows its own capacity differently. We should go in, Harry said. Yes, Fleur said. Yes, Daphne said. None of them moved immediately. Harry looked at the sky, the particular quality of a Scottish June night, where it never fully darkened and the north had a faint smear of something that was almost light, and the stars were present but not dominant. He thought about a graveyard and a thing with red eyes that had expected fear and not found it, and about old stone that had been waiting for 3 people who would fit a specific configuration, and about the word recognition, which Fleur had used in a library alcove in December in the first real conversation they'd had, and which had been the right word all along. "There's something I want to say," he said. "Before we go in." Both of them looked at him. "In December, neither of you chose this," he said. "The bond came before any of us had the information to choose it. And I know that, I know the whole beginning was something that happened to us rather than something we decided." He looked at Fleur and then at Daphne and then back at the space between them, which was the triangle's center, the configuration's heart. "But we've been choosing it every day since. Every morning in the room of requirement, every translation session, every time we decided to tell each other the truth instead of the managed version." He paused. "I want to say it explicitly, because the bond doesn't require us to say it, and I want to say it anyway." He held both of their gazes with the broad attention the bond made possible, seeing both of them fully, simultaneously, as they were rather than as anything else. "I choose this. You, specifically. The three of us, specifically. Not because of ancient magic or because something in the castle decided to intervene. Because of who you actually are." The night was quiet. Fleur looked at him for a long moment with the underneath face and something running through it that was, finally, fully admitted, the thing she'd been turning over since December, the model revision that had been ongoing for 6 months, arriving now at its conclusion with the specific quality of something that had taken the time it needed and was now complete. "When I came to Hogwarts," she said, slowly, "I believed I was here to prove something. To myself and to everyone who had looked at me and seen only the Vila and not the witch." She paused. "I proved it. Several times." A brief, dry quality that was purely Fleur. "But what I did not expect was to be," another pause, "deliberate. Seen. Not the Vila. Not the champion. Me." She looked at Harry and then at Daphne with the open face, fully open, armor not down but simply not present as a category anymore. "I choose this too. Explicitly." Daphne was looking at the ground, which was the one tell she had, when something was large enough to require looking away from before looking toward. She did the looking away for 3 seconds and then looked up with the clear, direct gaze and said, "I came to the Yule Ball with a proposal," she said. "A transaction. Something clean and boundaried and useful." A pause, and the almost smile was present, the real one, the full version. "I have been revising my model of what is useful for 6 months." She looked at Harry. "You told me in the alcove on the first morning that you prefer accurate to confident. That was the first time in my life someone has preferred that." Her voice was even and the evenness was the riverbank's version, shaped by the feeling, not suppressing it. "I choose this. Explicitly and with full information, which is the only way I know how to choose anything." Harry nodded. He felt the bond register all 3 decisions, not differently than before, because the bond had known, had always been the recognition of something already real, but with a quality of completeness, like a chord that has been building finding its final note. "Right," he said. "Let's go in." They walked toward the castle across the pitch grounds in the almost dark of the Scottish June night, and the bond ran between them in its full settled depth, and the castle's lights were warm in the windows above. He thought about the months ahead, the extended conversations with Dumbledore that were already planned, the ministry debrief, the question of Voldemort's soul fragments and what had to happen next, the summer and its distances and what managing distances with a permanent bond actually looked like in practice. He thought about Fleur going back to France in June and what that conversation was going to look like, and thought it would look like 2 people who trusted the thread between them and knew it didn't break with distance. He thought about Daphne in the next year at Hogwarts, moving through Slytherin's social geometry with the specific authority of someone who had stopped performing and found that what was underneath was more powerful than the performance. He thought about the room of requirement, and the marked stones that had spoken in configuration rather than language, and about an old magic that had looked at 3 people at a school dance and recognized something that the 3 people themselves took months to fully see. The thing it had recognized was this: 3 people who were, each of them, more than what everyone around them had decided they were. Who had arrived at a moment of extraordinary pressure with more to give than the pressure expected to find. Who had, separately and then together, refused the comfortable version of themselves in favor of the true one. Old Magic had looked at that and said, yes. These three. Harry Potter, who had been a burden and a symbol and a prophecy and a target and a boy who just wanted to play Quidditch, and who had turned out to be someone who looked at a thing with red eyes and felt not fear but the simple, enormous, ancient fire clarity of someone who knows exactly who they are. Fleur Delacour, who had been a surface and a standard and a villa and a champion, and who had turned out to be someone whose grandmother's magic ran in her bones and whose honest face, once unlocked, was more powerful than any performance she'd ever constructed. Daphne Greengrass, who had been a cold Slytherin and a strategic operator and a Greengrass principal walking on two legs, and who had turned out to be someone whose depth was genuine and enormous and whose capacity for loyalty, once she'd extended it, was absolute. Three of them. Explicitly chosen, thoroughly known, bound by something they hadn't asked for and had decided to keep. The castle doors opened before Harry touched them, which was a Hogwarts habit he'd stopped finding strange. They went in, and the warmth of the old stone closed around them, and somewhere in the castle's deep foundation something that had been waiting for a long time settled into the particular stillness of things that have arrived where they were always going. The ancient fire burned low and constant, patient as stone, old as the magic in the earth. And held.